Welcome to the final day of the Melbourne EdTech Summit. My name is Hope and I'm a Programs Manager at Kuriata. Over the past 2 days and the remaining sessions, the summit will connect educators, EdTech entrepreneurs, and industry stakeholders for profound discussions on the future of education innovation. In the morning, we will focus on thought leadership, featuring some of Australia's leading minds at the intersection of education and digital innovation. And in the afternoon sessions, the focus will be on EdTech entrepreneurship, where we will discuss the future of Australia's EdTech ecosystem, led by experienced Australian and global EdTech entrepreneurs. The Melbourne EdTech Summit is only possible with EduGrowth's partners. Thank you, Global Victoria, Kuriata, and AWS EdStart, who have helped bring this program to life. As we gather today, physically dispersed and virtually connected, allow me to pause and acknowledge the traditional owners of Australia and recognize their continuous and unbroken connection to the land, waters, and culture across the country. Today, I join you from the traditional custodians of the land, the Bunurong Bunwurrung and Wurundjeri Woiwurrung peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nation, and I extend all our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. I specifically extend my respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people present with us today. Just a brief introduction to the conference platform before we get started. You can see the complete agenda by clicking at the bottom and then selecting any one of the days. You can also build your own private schedule by clicking the heart icon at the bottom of each session. Your personal schedule will then be accessible from the heart icon at the top right. Clicking the Details tab on any session allows you to read more about the session and the presenters. This is where you can ask questions or have a chat with fellow delegates. Lastly, using the Participants icon at the bottom will show you everyone at the summit where you can connect with anyone or even arrange a video meeting or chat. All right, now I would like to introduce to you Martin Beach, the co-founder of Prosper Education, and Candice Tan, Policy Analyst at Global Victoria, to give the official welcome.
Thank you, Hope. And on behalf of EduGrowth, welcome to Day 3 of the EduGrowth Melbourne EdTech Summit. So EduGrowth is Australia's education, technology and innovation hub. And through connection and collaboration, we accelerate Australia's EdTech ecosystem globally. EduGrowth has a vision to transform global communities by enabling the growth of Australian EdTech. And the Melbourne EdTech Summit is an important program, bringing together leaders from Australia's EdTech ecosystem and international guests to explore the education innovation agenda. So I'd like to thank all the outstanding speakers who will be joining us over the course of the program, and to our program partners, Global Victoria, Kuriata, and AWS EdStart. And yesterday, some of the highlights for me were hearing from Andrew Barnes from Go1 on bridging the gap between formal education and future-proofing employment, and from Tim Power on the remarkable Mathletics story. And I always love hearing from Michael Prittis from Fathom AI about the third renaissance and the exciting work his company is doing in helping governments and industry transition their existing workforce out of soon-to-be obsolete roles into jobs which only humans can do well. And we have an exciting lineup for you this morning. Claire Field is up next, guiding us through the regulatory maze for the vet and skills sector. And on a personal note, I'm also looking forward to hearing from Anthony Morris from Cahoot Learning, talk to us about the difficult task of combining great digital content with effective online assessment. And I actually first heard about Cahoot when during the school homeschooling period with my daughters earlier this year. I heard laughing and screaming coming from my 11-year-old daughter's bedroom in the middle of the day, and I went in to find her and her sister competing in a maths competition on Cahoot and loving it. So look, I think there's never been a more important time for the work that EdTech businesses are doing for learners and educators around the world. And my heart goes out to the parents in Melbourne in particular, who are currently homeschooling their children. It's a tough gig. And an extra special thank you to the educators. And I hope today can have a meaningful impact in the way that you do business. So I now hand over to Candice Tan from our program partner, Global Victoria.
Thanks, Martin, and thank you, Hope. Good morning, everyone. My name is Candice Tan, and on behalf of the Victorian Government, I'd like to say how pleased we are to be a major sponsor of the inaugural Melbourne EdTech Summit. delivered by EduGrowth and with fellow sponsors Practera and AWS EdStart. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional Aboriginal owners of country throughout Victoria and Australia, their ongoing connection to this land, and we pay our respects to their culture and their elders, past, present, and future. It's wonderful to have people joining us from all around the world for day 3 of this exciting program, which explores and celebrates EdTech and education innovation. The COVID-19 pandemic has helped drive demand and interest for EdTech. The global market is expected to be worth over $342 billion by 2025. So this summit really provides a valuable opportunity to bring together Australia's EdTech leaders and global innovators to discuss a range of important issues facing the sector currently, as well as into the future, both the challenges and the great opportunities. Global Victoria is the trade agency of the Victorian Government. We open the world to Victorian businesses and welcome the business world to Victoria. Our international network of over 20 Victorian Government trade and investment offices in key export markets can open doors to contacts who can expand your horizons and help make your global ambitions a reality. The Victorian Government has outlined its objective to build Victoria as an EdTech and e-learning hub in its international education strategy. The Victorian EdTech sector is thriving and is well placed to seize on the opportunities that a booming global EdTech market has to offer. Melbourne, Victoria has expertise in the delivery of education services and is home to world-class online program management companies and education thought leaders. It also has a strong reputation in delivering high-quality international education. So this morning, we have some exciting sessions to look forward to. We're going to be hearing from some great thought leaders in education and EdTech with a focus on skills and online learning. So huge thanks and congratulations to EduGrowth for delivering this amazing event. And thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you very much, Martin and Candice, for officially opening the final day of the summit. Kicking off our exciting series of talks for today, please welcome our moderator for the first session on the topic of, is regulation helping or hindering education innovation? Kuriata currently works in the Victorian Government, supporting Victorian education providers to respond to global opportunities. She has worked in government since 2002 and has held various regulatory positions in higher and vocational education and training prior to the establishment of national regulators. Eva, over to you.
Thank you so much. It's fantastic to be here with you. I'd like to introduce our speaker for this morning's session, Claire Field. Claire provides strategic advice on VET, international education and private higher education to providers, investors and other tertiary education stakeholders. She has a column in Campus Morning Mail and offers a subscription service providing expert insights on the Australian tertiary sector. Claire is the host of the excellent podcast, What Now, What Next? Insights into Australia's tertiary education sector, and I highly recommend that podcast. She is past CEO of the Australian Council for Private Education and Training and has held senior roles in state and federal government agencies. She was integral in the establishment of the Australian Government's first national regulator, the National Audit and Registration Agency. And I have to say, Claire, I had completely forgotten about NARA. I had to do a bit of a Google because whenever you think of the first regulator, you think of ASQA. So
we do indeed. Thank you very much.
So good to have you on board. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I think before we do start going through and asking a few questions, it'd be really good if you can provide some context around, because we all know that the vet sector is quite complicated. There's a lot of regulation. There's been a lot of reviews. So it'd be good if you can take us through a bit of that background info and then we will have some conversation.
Terrific, thank you. And I think I've got some slides if someone can put those up for us. Otherwise I can just talk to them, that's fine. What I wanted to talk about and focus on in terms of vet regulation and thinking about the impact of COVID, is it fast tracking innovation? I figured we can think about regulation in terms of providers, who teaches, in terms of how and what we teach, and also in terms of the type of award that a learner receives. And I think that we've seen some innovation, some of it caused by COVID, some of it happening pre, COVID that there is some innovation in all of those different aspects. So firstly, in terms of providers and who's doing the teaching and what innovation have we seen during the COVID era, I think ASQA is to be commended for their flexibility on this particular regulatory area. They've allowed providers to put their registration on hold, which is something that we haven't seen before. And when I last checked last week, we had 79 RTOs who have temporarily put things on hold, and fingers crossed for all of them that as we emerge from the pandemic, that they're able to get their business back up and operating and enrol students again. They've been a mix of enterprise RTOs. I saw some ELICOS providers and other small and medium providers who didn't have students as we went into the pandemic, or not many. They finished them off and they're in abeyance. We've seen across both the higher ed and the vet regulators that they've waived a whole lot of fees, and I think again they're be commended for that. And then something that was underway already, but will continue, I hope, to improve things post-COVID is one of the key recommendations from ASQA's rapid review, and that is focused on a concept of RTO self-assurance, and we might talk a bit more about that in a minute. Next slide, please. We've also got some innovations, or not so much, in terms of what we teach. And hats off to ITECA, the peak body that's replaced ACPET. They seem to be the lone voice in raising an issue, which is around national training packages, oversighted by the AISC, the Australian Industry and Skills Committee. The committee set up an emergency response subcommittee. And as someone who used to work in government, there's nothing like a committee having subcommittees. And it had a good intent, and it still does. And it was there to make, to try and innovate, to help the sector keep an eye on quality, but make innovations around training package qualifications. I've been fairly underwhelmed by the level of activity that's come out. And there's a key issue impressing on the sector at the moment around work placements, qualifications that require mandatory time in the workplace, and so far we haven't seen the AISC take charge of that. So that's a key problem where we haven't seen the innovation that we need. Course accreditation is interesting. Both the Victorian regulator, the VRQA, and the WA regulator, TAC, have been singled out in recent submissions to the Productivity Commission on how important their course accreditation has been, how nimble and flexible that it's been in helping business and training providers put together courses that sit outside of training packages. So that's one to keep an eye on and good to have.
So Claire, just to interrupt, I'm just interested, do you think there has been some extra course accreditation that's happening like during COVID for COVID-specific sort of responses?
We haven't seen any data on that yet, and I'm not aware of it, but I think there's a challenge. What seemed to come out of those submissions was, and perhaps that's their size, or other aspects of them, there was a strong recognition that those two regulators are quicker with course accreditation than the ASQA processes currently are. So I think that's something that ASQA will need to have in mind, and is a key issue for the sector as it tries to innovate. Yeah,
it'd be interesting to see the data if it comes out, to see, because I mean these are really different trying testing times, so whether or not the course accreditation has been a response to that. So anyway, sorry for interrupting, Claire.
No, please. And I'd said jump in any time. How we deliver, there's been some real, again, important innovations there. We saw early on both ASQA and TEXA accept that CRICOS providers, those teaching international students, would have to be able to move their course delivery 100% online. In normal times, there's a limit on the level of online delivery. And again, I think that's been a good response to students not being able to come to class, whether they're in Australia or overseas. Going back to that point about the subcommittee and whether it's been sufficiently innovative around work placements, I was struck. ASQA's got a strategic review of online learning out, and I think it was in there or somewhere else that I was reading really clear signal that they are open to more simulated work environments. And I've been seeing quite a shift in the EdTech sector, not just here, but across the world, much more of a focus on virtual reality and augmented reality as a means of teaching people during COVID times. COVID sort of sped things up, teaching people workplace skills when they can't be in the workplace. And there's a range of uses, particularly in medical, virtual or augmented reality operations when you can't actually operate on patients. So it's interesting that ASQA as the regulator is open to that. Yeah. But again, we haven't seen the shift from those who control what goes into the content of training package qualifications. And I understand there are quality risks, but if doctors can be trained or keep their professional skills up to date using augmented or virtual reality, probably we could do a bit more of that in the vet sector. There is that strategic review that ASQA has signalled. They've been looking at online learning for a while. It's more important than ever, and I think that's also very good. And then when we look at innovation around awarding, what certificates and qualifications do people have? Pre-COVID, we had the AQF review suggesting that we need micro-credentials added into the AQF. VET, I guess, has had them in some form, skill sets and just, a unit of competency. It's unclear when and where that's going to happen, but I think there's a real need for it. Or otherwise, we run the risk in VET, and I've got some data I'll show next, of non-accredited short courses or industry-accredited short courses actually serving as real competition for the partial qualifications or unit-only enrolments that we have in VET. And could I have the next slide, please? I'll just show quickly a bit of data that that shows the change. Next one, that's it. So if you look in the last 5 years, now all this data is pre-COVID. We've got a question coming in. Why is there so much regulation in this sector? Oh, well, quickly, because we've got states, territories, Commonwealth government who funds it. They want to know their money's being spent properly. And we've got a range of industries who want to make sure that people are getting the skills they need. Is all of that regulation done properly? Question. But that's the reason why we have as much as we do. I'm just going to quickly put those data up. In VET, program enrolments are full qualifications or accredited courses or formal skill sets. And we've seen a significant decline in those enrolments in the last 5 years. The only that we've seen an increase in has been international students, fee for service. Subject-only enrolments have dropped a small amount overall, 1.1 million, but that's actually only 4% in 5 years. But if you look at those subject-only enrolments, we've seen more than 25% decrease in IT, food, hospitality and management, and about the same in management and commerce and science. So particularly IT and management and commerce, that's where there are threats from the likes of Google, Microsoft, and a range of others offering short course alternatives. And wouldn't you do one of their short courses and have their credentialing rather than one of ours, particularly if we can't get those innovations right through that subcommittee. That'll do for me, and I'm happy to take your questions or those that are coming through on the chat.
Yes, well, I can see I've got some questions, but given that this is all about participation, I might go for some of the questions that have come through the feed. So someone's like, you can't take boards that are actually empowered to drive your institution. Can't build TAFE boards that actually are empowered to drive their institution with autonomy. Quite sure.
Okay, well, I can try. I'm not quite sure I fully understand it either, but I think they might be asking is there was a recommendation out of a review of TAFE South Australia that TAFE boards could take on more of a role like the universities do and have a greater degree of autonomy over course design and accreditation, as well as more autonomy, a bit more of a shift to a bit of self-regulation. We're not there yet. There isn't an appetite for that, but I think this is where this ASQA focus on self-assurance could allow TAFE boards and other providers a greater degree of flexibility and innovation and in how they drive quality through their organisations, albeit we all have to comply with the standards. So I think there's some opportunities there as ASQA flesh that project out.
Yeah. Claire, do you want to tell us a bit about, I listened to Claire's podcast yesterday about what the New Zealand Registration Authority is doing with self-assurance, and it was quite an interesting concept. So I'm wondering, Claire, if you wouldn't mind telling us a bit about that, and for people that are interested, they can actually go and listen to the podcast as well.
I'd be pleased to have them all. That'd be great. One of the things that I thought, ASQA's been consulting, and you can find there's a consultation paper on their webpage about self-assurance. It's come out of a few different reviews and a more recent one, a rapid review. And they are wanting to engage with the sector as they develop up that concept. What will it be like for them to shift to this model? But what I thought would be helpful for me to understand, and also listeners, was what does it mean from a provider perspective? And I know ASQA, they're clear that they've been influenced and learning some of what the New Zealanders do. And I guess what they do is they have 6 key areas of focus, 2 around your student outcomes and 4 around your processes, where they want to know how you as a business keep an eye on what it is that you're doing and make improvements to it. And really, without there being a simple answer, it's a bit like, what are your business planning processes? Like, how do you plan what you're going to do? You implement it, you check that it's working, and then you make some improvements. And, you know, various different schemes have different labels attached to it. What I loved, it was Kylie Wilson from the New Zealand School of Tourism. What she talked about was how that process helps them improve their business. It's about
that's what I like
vision and purpose. Their vision and purpose, and helping them stay on track in achieving what they want to achieve, and putting their learners and their business focus right at the heart of what they do. So that's innovative, and it'd be great to see us move to some kind of model like that.
Absolutely. I mean, it really empowers them as education providers, and I think it really ensures that you're in the business to educate people. Like, you have to be a genuine education provider to be able to embrace and be part of that self-assurance process. Now, I have to apologise. I dropped out of the feed. I don't know what's wrong with my internet. And I lost questions, so they've all been scrubbed. But there's another one that's can't we have a single regulator for post-secondary training?
And there's one underneath that says why ASQA and TECs are separate. Look,
okay, I haven't got that.
Okay, for dual sector providers, I think it is an issue. And I know there's a lot of work between the two bodies to try and I think they could do more to streamline the regulatory processes. On the other hand, there's 4,000 RTOs, thereabouts, and most of them have nothing to do with the higher education sector. The higher education TECSA has fewer than 200 providers that it regulates, and about 40 of them have 1 million students in them. So do vet providers really want to be regulated by a body that's pretty, if not captured by, very responsive to and focused on, and understandably, the university sector. So I think it's an issue for the dual sectors, no question at all, but there are two separate sets of standards. If you want to be a vet provider, you've got to be in that training package kind of landscape. And I would worry that if the two were merged, we'd see a stronger higher ed focus than perhaps vet's the poor cousin to pretty much everything most of the time. So that would be my concern.
I would agree with you wholeheartedly there, Claire. Now, this is an interesting one. Is there a piece of regulation that, were it to change, would dramatically change what we could do in the sector?
Oh, yes. If I could have a magic wand, yes. Look, and it hasn't worked, right? So it's been tried. I have been impressed by what Stephen Joyce recommended around the skills organisations. I think the skills service organisations that we currently have do a great job. I wouldn't necessarily be chucking them out, but the regulations that they are forced into around the restrictions on training packages and the subcommittees and bureaucracy around it. What Joyce was trying to get to, and we're not there by a long shot, with these new pilots of skills organisations, he was trying to get to industry put some money on the table and show that you wanted to be responsible. Let's say plumbing. The plumbers would put their hands up to be in charge of the plumbing training package. But the ins and outs of it would be not through committees and subcommittees. It's up to the plumbers. ASQA has to check that their quals are at the right level, and then the plumbers are involved with preferred providers, those they trust to get the really good job outcomes for their industry. Anyone can deliver plumbing training, but the ones who receive government funding are those who the industry trusts and has confidence in. I think that would allow us to strip out a lot of the microscopic detail of what's in training packages, which in turn bedevils the audit process and in turn creates a whole lot of regulatory complexity for providers.
Do you think there's a different way that we could perhaps do the auditing? Because, look, I know in my day with audit, it was really people going in and looking at procedures, and it's all paperwork. And no one ever gets in there to see exactly what's happening. Are these kids learning anything? What are the outcomes? So is there a whole difference in the approach of the auditors need?
I think the standards still tend to lend themselves to that focus of have you got this, have you got that? And you know, when you see that, for example, there's a unit in the nursing qualification which used to say, sort of show that you students know about two of the most common mental health issues. Somehow or other there was obviously some regulatory issue at some point, and instead it now says your students need to know about, I don't know, 10 or 12 of them. If a provider only gets 11 of the 12, they're non-compliant. Whereas, you know, medical people, so this isn't my view, this is a review of TAFE South Australia by Terry Moran, who designed the training package approach. We've got so much detail bedded in those packages, which auditors have to audit against. I think self-assurance and linked to it, if you read the rapid review, a potential change to the standards. If we're asking questions about how are your students going, and if they're not going as well as you'd like or as well as they were last year, what are you reflecting on and changing in your business practices? That takes us into a different kind of conversation around audit.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Now we do have some. Oh, we're done. Oh, we're done.
We could go on forever, couldn't we, Claire? Really? I hadn't even got started on my question.
Yeah, I would love to have more time with Q&A, but unfortunately we have to move on with the program. But thank you very much, Eva and Claire. Fantastic to hear some of the innovations happening in the vet and skills sector there, and yeah, the work obviously that's still needed in terms of regulations in the state and federal level to help push this education innovation forward. So for our delegates, make sure to check out Claire's podcast to hear more on everything about your shared sector. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Hi, Eva.
Up next, we have our
Okay, I hope I had a bit of trouble just hearing you then, but I think you've introduced me and I'm ready to introduce the panel. So welcome back to me. And if you were just on that earlier session, we're going to switch away from regulation, but we are going to keep our focus on innovation. And I'm very pleased to be joined this morning by Vivienne King, who is the CEO of Box Hill Institute of TAFE. Vivienne, good morning. Lovely to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, pleasure. Well, nice for me to be here. Thank you, ReadyGrad. And also Trevor Fairweather, who leads the Student Management Systems Division of ReadyTech. Hi, Trevor.
Hi, Claire. Nice to see you again.
Terrific to have you. Now, I'll briefly introduce you, and then we're going to start with a couple of PowerPoints with a little bit of data as context for our discussion. Vivienne is a senior executive with extensive experience across all elements of business, from design, business development, and business transformation through to service delivery. And as the CEO for Box Hill Institute, Vivienne leads an education organisation delivering under TAFE Victoria and CAE structures. Vivienne, and I didn't realise you've also got a background in transport, so there's a lot,
Yep.
a lot in your experience that you bring to your current role.
Thank you.
And as I mentioned, Trevor leads the Student Management Systems Division of ReadyTech, which is an ASX-listed tech business, home to Australia's most used training and student management systems, VetTrack and JobReady Plus. And Trevor, great to have you with us. So if I could just start with the last slide of my previous presentation, if that's not too, just for anybody who's new to this, that's it, perfect. I just wanted to, when we're thinking about innovation in delivery, blended learning, strong employability, and the current times that we're in with COVID, where is the sector been in the last 5 years? I won't belabor the point for those who were in the last half an hour session. We've had a decline in enrolments in full courses and qualifications, and in some key subject only enrolment areas. And I'm particularly focused, among the many things that I focus on those IT and management and commerce short courses, where I think VET is susceptible to the non-accredited or the industry accredited providers out there, Google and Microsoft, just to name a couple. So that's been the situation. There are some differences. Overall, government-funded enrolments are down, albeit in Victoria in the last couple of years, they've been up, but this is the national picture. So that's a snapshot of data from the NCVR. And Trevor, one of the things that ReadyTech does is, in the last couple of years, is an annual RTO survey. And you've got a little bit of data as well to share with us. Sort of pre-COVID, where was the sector up to from your experience and your survey responses? And if we can go to, Trevor's got a couple of slides just to, by way of background. Trevor, over to you.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Claire. And one of the things that we're really privileged to do at ReadyTech, supporting close to 1,400 training organisations in university, TAFE, private RTOs. We're really passionate about the sector. We like to advocate for our clients in the sector. So we commissioned the Voice of Vet report through an independent research piece. As you mentioned, we've been doing that for a couple of years now. And the goal around it is to really get a broad sense of the feelings across the sector. We look at things like business performance, revenue performance, projections, challenges, opportunities, thoughts on regulation, feelings around government support. And the last survey that we did, as you mentioned, was pre-COVID. And we did survey close to 400 senior managers. And as you can see here, some of the really interesting insights that I think is quite relevant for the discussion today is around this shift to more non-accredited training. So here you can see a snippet of the report where we asked RTOs what types of qualifications and courses they currently offer. And you can see here that there is a significant shift where 18% more RTOs started offering non-accredited training in 2019 compared to what they offered in 2018. If we go to the next slide, we can then have a look at what qualifications RTOs intend to offer that they currently don't. And it shows that 14% more RTOs will start to offer more non-accredited courses, with many considering micro-credentials as part of that mix. So I think this is really quite interesting, and I think supports some of the data that's coming out of the NCVR. And I think one of the key questions that I think it poses is whether the current training package system is responsive enough for the needs of what industry and what employers are looking for.
Yes, and I won't get started again on that. So I will leave the conversation because I do think that's an important question. But Vivienne, I wonder if I can go to you and ask you to put some, I guess, flesh on the bones, as it were, some innovative partnerships that you've been progressing at Box Hill, particularly around employability and working with employers. And this was pre-COVID. Sorry, if we can just, because we're going to come into COVID and how we shift and adapt. But
let's do that.
Through that. Yeah,
that's great. I'm going to use two very short case studies, even though there's an enormous amount of work that's been behind them and to get the success that we're doing. But I wanted to truly demonstrate how you can work with big industry in partnership, but also the small industries or the small business owners that want to make a difference. And so the first case study that I want to talk about is the Institute took a lead in creating a cybersecurity course, and that was done in collaboration with AusCyber, who gave some funding to develop a very specialised course. It's a national course and it's implemented right across Australia now, so the product that we produced is the same product that is taught right around Australia. We launched it in May 2018, and why this was really special is that we were actually given funding to create the Cybersecurity Operational Centre, which they call the CSOC, which I never knew what they were talking about for the first 3 months of my tenure. But it's really the dedicated home for cybersecurity training, and it provides our students with a real hands-on experience to practice and reinforce their learning. Now, in the environment we're in today, you can only imagine what cybersecurity resources are out there and how many more we require, but we'll talk about that later. So it offers pathways, to an advanced diploma in cybersecurity. It also gives pathways in articulation to other vet courses, along with higher education that we run. So things like the Bachelor of Computer Systems, majoring in cybersecurity, and we're working with other universities to articulate our courses into university level. But why is this sort of a great case study? It's because we at Box Hill actually run the Cisco Networking Academy and have a 20-year relationship with Cisco. And from that, we were able to leverage access to other industries that needed these skill bases. But one of the things they kept telling us is that it needs to be agile, it needs to be responsive, and it needs to be real. And what I mean by that, look, I've got to preface this, Claire, with I have many degrees from universities, so I do value my degrees. However, you go to university to gain knowledge, and you then take that knowledge out and you apply it as you get experience in the workplace. What I've learned about vocational education is that you go to a vocational institution or do a vocational course to get a skill base to hit the ground and apply it immediately. And so if you can move those things together and work with it, you can get both benefits. And there are, particular partnerships that we have worked through with the cybersecurity example with the banks. And our students go there. We have their people come in and do teaching. And so we've really blended the industry, and there are many partners involved in this, to the point where we've just been successful in getting further funding to take this training and development to the next level nationally. So again, for a need in the industry, no one delivering that need at a certified level, AusCyber coming to us, talking to us about what we could do based on the relationships we already have. We now have a national program that is incredibly successful, and our students actually almost walk into jobs because of the hands-on experience. So that's the big chunky one, and it's national, and the Commonwealth are involved and the state are involved and lots of industry. But the other one is a really interesting one where we talk about the Moroccan Soup Kitchen. Now, if anyone in Melbourne knows the Moroccan Soup Kitchen, run by Hannah Hasfari, and she came to us and said, look, I've got a whole bunch of people, and they were particularly women, that are trying to get a skill base, and I'm doing my best to teach them. I bring them into my restaurant. I give them front of house and back of house experience in catering, but they need a qualification, Vivienne. They need to be recognised. Now, working with Hannah, we were able to bring 5 different support programs together, which provided a unique learning pathway. And so what that does is it then allows these people to come in, register and do like I'll call Lego blocks before we even get into micro-credentialing, and to build a qualification that they can then apply in the real world. That's now developed into what we call the Sprout program. And why we call it the Sprout program is Hannah has a real belief in, if it's like a play it forward. If you gain a skill and you get to run a small business, and even as simple as making jam and selling them in cottage industry, we want you to bring someone else in, and we want you to help them gain skills and be able to sprout their own living. And this is particularly interesting because it's about partnering for student at the heart. And so we've got the big industry case study, but we also have that social license, that community involvement. And I think that's what VET is about, is that we can be agile and we can work with any industry to bring together something that is certified and recognised. So that's my sort of two little case studies that I thought I'd share with you.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Trevor, I'm going to come back to you. I'm not going to ask you. We do have a couple of questions, and if people have them, put them in the chat box. I'm not going to ask you who drives the accreditation of training, because actually it is the regulator. And will TAE continue? I don't think I'm not going to pin you down to be an expert on TAE. We will come to that. But what I did want to ask you about, so that was the world pre-COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Then we've, spent 6 months grappling to work dynamically and innovatively in a pandemic. Talk us through ReadyTech and changes that you've made and what you've seen amongst your clients as they've gone through the last 6 months.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Claire. And great question. I think for us, we're really on a mission to try and help training organisations digitise their business. And kind of whilst pre-COVID, we feel like we've done some of that. Essentially, as soon as COVID hit, it's absolutely skyrocketed, and I'm sure that won't be a surprise to everyone. Just interestingly, I'll reference our Voice of Vet survey again. When we did the survey pre-COVID, it showed that only 44% of RTOs offered some form of online training. I imagine now if we ran that survey, it would be very, very, very different results. But I do think, and I referenced some of Vivienne's points before, I think it's important to know that we should be striving for more of a blended learning model, because VET is very much about that practical skills acquisition. So I think the learners being able to demonstrate that practical skills, they're requiring, it can be a bit more challenging in an online environment. So But I don't think it doesn't mean it can't be online. And I think you referenced, augmented reality and virtual reality and those sorts of things, will help sort of digitize that experience and move it more online. So I think for us, what we've seen is, many of our existing clients are really trying to digitize that student experience. So in some cases, that might be just starting to, move some of their applications, admissions, enrollments online. In some cases, it might be just provisioning some sort of student portal where they can start to have communications online with their students. And then it goes all the way through to, learning and assessment online. So there's certainly the curve is pushing up with a lot of organisations really trying to digitise their student experience.
Terrific. And we've got a question on that, with someone asking, what are some first steps for those in the skills sector looking to optimise the online learning experience? Vivienne, did you want to provide some thoughts on that?
Yes, well, I want to preface what I'm about to talk about is that we used to have a career for life, and now we have a life of careers. So all the more reason to start looking at how we, get those skills operating, homed in. So I think from a perspective of being able to be agile, understanding the skills that are required by industry, and then what are the different modes that you can use to provide those skills in a student. But also, we've got to come back to the people that are helping students learn those skills. Do they have the capability? Are they the type of people that can build their experiences and their skill base to be able to do this in a different mode? And we're finding that. We had a symposium yesterday, actually, where we talked about the flipped classroom, and we had 17 speakers, which were our teachers, and they were showing how they're doing things differently to enhance the skills of teachers, but also to make sure that we can build the skills of students. So I hope I've answered that question. It sort of flipped away very quickly.
Well, we no, that's all right. I know that's okay. Another question that's come through, because I'm going to come back to that. We had a bit of a discussion earlier, or last week, I think it was, around blended learning and what does that mean, and what happens when we go back into face-to-face, when we're allowed to do some of that.
I have some views. Yep.
Yes, and flipped classrooms comes to that. But before we lose some of these questions, the person who typed in the first one about, who's in charge of the accreditation has come back with a second go at it, which now makes more sense to me. And they're asking, who cares about the accreditation? So in the data that I've put up, and Trevor, your survey, it certainly looks like there's a shift away from some of that fee-for-service short course activity in VET, and your providers, clients looking at moving into the non-accredited, and there's a big conversation around micro-credentials happening globally. So the question is, who cares about accreditation? Is it the learner, the regulator, or the employer? Now, Trevor, you work in business, and ReadyTech has a HR employer focused part of the organisation, as well as the student management side. Do you have a perspective on who cares?
Yeah, absolutely. I think ultimately it's a combination of different people, but I think ultimately someone goes and undertakes some sort of learning or some sort of education to more than likely try and move into a new employment field, upskill in a different employment field, or even change careers. So I think the person that ultimately cares about it is the employer. Because they need to be able to certify that this individual has the skills, the experience, whether it be the qualifications to undertake that role, that task, or that activity. So I think enabling the employer to be able to easily identify that this individual has got the skills to do a particular role is really, really relevant. I look at organisations. One of the organisations that comes to mind for me is General Assembly. So they're a non-accredited training provider. They're a global training business, and they specialise in digital skills around web development, digital marketing, data science, that sort of thing. It's all non-accredited training. So all of these students acquire these skills, and I know for us as ReadyTech as an employer, we really rate the training and that comes out of that organisation. So their brand is so well regarded. So we're not necessarily looking for, do they have a certificate that lines up to the AQF? We're looking at the quality of training because they're so connected to industry. We know that we're going to get really strong skills on the basis of the training that happens there. So it's certainly well regarded, and they would go up to the top of the pile in terms of shortlisting candidates from that training organisation. So so that's some of the things that I think personally. I think certainly from an employer perspective, they're the ones that want to have confidence that this individual is going to be able to do the role that they're going to undertake.
And when you're looking for cybersecurity, though, you'll look for a Box Hill graduate.
Box Hill, for sure.
But I agree. I do agree with you that non-accredited or industry accredited done well is a real competitor and is delivering skills that employer needs. Vivienne, we've got a couple of questions about TAFE. Is the TAFE setting, you should speak on entirely all TAFEs, or maybe just your own. Do you think, is TAFE partnering enough with the EdTech sector to ensure that that what you're doing is agile in terms of teaching students, and particularly teaching them around the latest technology? What do you have a view on that?
Yeah, I do. Having the latest technology means investment. And so from a perspective of where we're going to go and how quickly technology changes, we have to be very connected with industry to allow that investment to be balanced. And so, when we work with Cisco, they are, and I'm not promoting Cisco, by the way, it's just we have the academy, they provide resources for our students to use. So the students are always at the, state of the art, what that group expects their students to come into the workforce with. So I think there is an opportunity to do so much more with the industry in a partnership approach. This is the big issue for the vet sector, in the sense of you come into the vet sector to learn a skill, take it out and immediately use it. If you're using outdated equipment, well, then that's going to be a disadvantage to the student. So I think, we've got to get that sort of really strong relationship, the ability to invest in TAFEs in a way that allows our students to always be up to date. Now, some of them, just to give you an example, we have a centre of excellence from a plumbing and refrigeration perspective, and the industry update the equipment that is in that centre of excellence all the time, so that our students walk out absolutely ready to do that. Now, it may be that it's not the state of the art, it's probably the next level down, which is exactly what most people have. And so that's been balancing really well, and that's where we've got to get to with the the tech side of things.
Okay, and I'm going to start to look now post where we are today and start to look forward to the future, and bearing in mind that no one has the perfect crystal ball, but you're both leaders who are thinking forward and thinking about the future and the change that the sector is going through. So in a post-COVID world, and can't we wait for that to come along, yes. Thinking up to 3 to 5 years hence, what do you think the world looks like for providers and their partners, EdTech partners and industry partners? And I particularly wanted to think about that conversation that we had last week around, does face-to-face teaching change even when we can all go back into the classroom again? So Vivienne, I might start with you, and then Trevor, I'll come to you for your thoughts and observations.
Okay, well, my crystal ball's a bit smoky at the moment. However, look, I think the lessons that we're learning through COVID should never, ever be lost. We flipped our situation very, very quickly to continue people's learning journey. And I talk about 3 categories. We went to remote really quickly. This is remote. This is me talking to you using a platform, and our teachers just flip really quickly to be able to do that. Online is really about what the product is online, you know, how people use it, how they interface with it. Is it a self-paced product that they then have a remote session with an assessor or a teacher? And then you've got the sort of blended learning. And with, you know, the vet sector, we are about hands-on skills. And so how do we blend that with the other two? And I think you're going to have, you know, a real mixture of how courses run. And it's going to be the need. So a learner is going to look at a course or a skill set or a micro-credential in the future and go, am I doing this for me? Is it a skill that I think will enhance? Do I just want to do it? Therefore, I might go to LinkedIn and do a video course. Right? On the other hand, I want my employer to understand I actually have a skill base, and this is a recognised course for whatever reason. It could be a well-recognised course, or it could be a certified course. But again, it's a micro-credential with a badge that means something. And I think that's sort of the future in a sense that not many people are going to want to sign up for 2 years worth of learning when they can build. There'll be building blocks. So to me, it's, you know, can they be recognised appropriately by the people that think about it? Is it agile and valued by people? You know, the AQF Lego block side of things, because if someone wants to build up into a degree, we should be looking at that type of ability. I heard the end bit of the regulation you were talking about, Claire, and to me, let's get bots into our system for all the administration tick boxes that, you know, people are enrolled at the right time, they're funded at the right time, they do that. And let's move into experience and knowledge versus perfection of whether I've got my records totally correct. Now, I'm not saying it's not important, it is, because of the investment we make, but I think there are things that in the future we'll be looking at the student experience, we'll be looking at their value within the workplace and what employers say about that course because of the people that they employ. So really, that's where I think the future is going, and that, you know, university will have its place, you know, certified diplomas will have its place, but many so coming into that, you know, careers, many careers over your lifetime, people are not going to want to do a degree for every time they want to change the way they're going, and they won't want to lock in a year or two for every time they want to change. So,
absolutely, and may not need to, hopefully. So Trevor, your reflections, if you're looking 3 to 5 years, reflecting on what Vivienne's talked about, how she sees what happens in providers are changing, what's your sense of things in terms of the ReadyTech perspective and those providers that you work with?
Yeah, absolutely, Claire. Probably echo a lot of Vivienne's thoughts there. I think certainly there'll be a real push to more real blended learning. I think that theory and practical piece coming together more closely linked. I think even some providers are starting to use augmented reality, virtual reality in their training. I think we're going to see more and more of that, and it'll really support more distance and online learning. I also think things like the concept of vet and higher ed, you know, when you kind of look in that crystal ball 5 years down the track, are they going to come more closely together and be stronger pathways and all of that sort of thing happening there? I think absolutely. I also think you know, when you kind of look at it from a cradle to grave perspective, in that concept of lifelong learning, the pathway from secondary education into tertiary education, I think will shift significantly. I think we're starting to see some of that through the New South Wales government in terms of some of the support they're putting into secondary schools, particularly in making vet more accessible in secondary. And I think that's fantastic, and would love to see more of that, because I think it gives the younger generation and the students more choice and more options around their pathways and their learning. I think things around certification will absolutely change. I think it'll obviously move more digital. And I think the nous around the paper certificate, whilst it's great and you can, you know, have that hanging on the wall, I think that the digital certification will absolutely be something that is wanted from students, and I think it will aid in that connection between education and employment. I certainly think things around the the brand and the quality of the training provider will start to make more and more of a difference as students start to seek out where they want to go and get a lot of their learning. As Vivienne touched on, I think the length of learning will certainly be different. It'll be more micro, it'll be more bite-sized chunks, and it'll be really sort of strongly certified on skills acquisition. If I kind of look at, say, some of the things that are potentially happening in the US, I think some training providers are moving to more membership-based sort of training systems. So as a learner, you can ensure that you've got your training almost guaranteed that you've got the currency because you're signing up to a membership program and you're dipping into the learning when you need it to keep yourself upskilled. So yeah, I think there'll be a lot of change, and I think it's really exciting. And I think if I put my vet hat on, I think there's a tremendous opportunity for vet providers to be working really, really closely with employers and industry, and really starting to take look at what the shape of learning will look like over the next 5 years.
Very exciting, thank you. One of the points that Trevor was potentially vet and higher education providers working more closely together. And Vivienne, you touched on this briefly as well in some of you when you were talking about some of your partnerships and the Cisco Academy. But what I'm going to ask you to tease out a bit is you're not just looking at articulating your students up into higher ed. There's a reverse process. I'm not sure it's entirely articulation.
Reverse articulation.
Okay, it is formal as that, where you're working with some of the universities to have their students come and do that practical skills intake. Did you want to talk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, look, I'm quite happy to name the university that we're moving forward with. We are talking to others, but Deakin University, which was in our precinct as well, we've been talking about how to nest different courses into the degrees. And we've been able to work through one with the cybersecurity. We're not offering it yet, but we're very close to it in the sense that there's a semester that the university student comes in and actually does that part of the course in the TAFE environment. And it is then nested into their degrees. So that way, we're talking about, dual branding. I don't know if we'll get there, but we might try for that reputation, Trevor. We've got to sort of build that to make sure that people know that it's valued. So what we've been doing is we're looking at other areas that they have courses at the higher education that we don't run, and looking at how we can take a Certificate 3 or even part of the diploma and build that in so that they might enroll in, say, Deakin a degree. They come and they spend a year with us of that degree, and they actually get that certificate, but it's part of the articulation for the whole of the degree. So instead of us just stepping up into them, they may step down to us, and it could be different parts of the education journey with them. And we're really excited about this because it is part of our micro-credentialing design as well. We've got a whole framework behind where we are actually linking it to the AQF framework, because some people will want to do that and they will need the recognition to get the credit for the next step. But they can be taken without that AQF because that's all they want to do. So I think there is an opportunity for working much closer with universities and TAFE for the need of the learner and the industry, and that micro-credentialing doesn't necessarily need to be aligned to an AQF depending on how you're going to use it.
And we've got, I'm slightly distracted. I've got some flowers and they've just fallen over, but we're all good. Water going through the through the computer system, so stick with us. Now we've got a few questions coming in. I'm just going to quickly answer one that's just a fact-based one. Someone's asked what courses were mainly taken by the international fee-for-service students. So if you want to get into that data, you can find it at the NCVER website, ncver.edu.au, or the Austrade website. Mostly they're doing diplomas, mostly in business, commerce, management, IT type courses. So I'm going to now go back into the conversation that we've been having. And I guess we've talked a lot about changing the courses that are offered, stronger links to industry, innovation and flexibility. And there've been a few different questions that have come up about, do you think this is going to change the skills that, I'm paraphrasing from the questions that we've got, the skills that vet teachers need to teach? And will there be a role for micro-credentials in the credentialing of our vet workforce? Any thoughts on that? Vivienne, probably to you first, and then Trevor, if you've got any insights.
Well, we're all doing it. We're doing it already. If you have a look at LinkedIn, you will see a number of micro-credential badges that our trainers have already had to gain. Any of our teachers that are doing true online and remote learning have had to do a short course with us to ensure they know how to use the technology, the difference in communicating, how to use, all of this and what we're doing. So that was the very first stage for us. And so a lot of the micro-credentials that we are developing have core elements that are going to be required in what we call the new world. Now, some of it is very practical, and that's what I'm talking about with those credentials at the moment. But it means that if a teacher doesn't have that, they can't do the online with us. It was something we put them through immediately. And the other thing too is that this was a journey that Box Hill was on. We actually gave ourselves 3 years to get there, to be truthful. COVID made us get into there, in rough and ready in 3 months, and hence why this credential was available so quickly. We just put all effort into it. So there will be a requirement for teachers and instructors to have a different level of projecting their skill, if I can say. Now, we had a session yesterday about how to teach people to do pattern making. How do you do that remotely when they're not standing over a great big table to actually watch? And we saw how this teacher was doing it behind the scenes. She showed us all the equipment she was using, gave us hints about how she uses her voiceover, fast tracks things versus slow instruction. So yes, the answer is they will need to change in the way that they present their skills. The skills, depending on whether, like a plumber, I think we're going to need plumbers for a very long time. Their equipment will change, but how do we help those instructors teach using this blended approach? I think that's where it's going to hit, more than turning them on a penny and saying, oh, sorry, your whole skill base is changed. I think it's going to be a quick move towards how to deliver those skills, as well as new industries that will come in. And of course, we want to hire those really great people that are in those industries
to come and train for you. Absolutely. And
yeah.
Trevor, I might ask you a slightly different question again that's come up in the chat box. How are we going to keep an eye on all these micro credentials and other full qualifications and all Vivienne's degrees and various vet qualifications that people have, and non-accredited and industry accredited? How are we going to keep track of who's got what and what it all means?
Great question.
Yeah, it is a great question, Claire. I think probably not easily, to be honest. I think because there are so many different, if I look at it just from a digital credentials platform, there are a number of different credentials platforms where you can be issued a badge on. I think it absolutely has to have a level of interoperability. So, one institution might use one platform and they might issue a digital credential on that. Then that student might go somewhere else and they might earn a digital credential or a badge or micro credential somewhere else. So there needs to be a mechanism for the person that is earning that digital credential to be able to say, this is where I house all of my digital credentials. Whether that is on LinkedIn, potentially, for some people. There's the licenses and certifications area within LinkedIn where you can put your badges in there. It might be more of a marketplace where it's an open marketplace where employers can then come and look for talent and can be looking for talent based on skills that they've acquired and the badges, and they can verify that capability online and that sort of thing. So whether the government steps in and looks at sort of creating something for the Australian landscape, which houses all that information, is potentially something that could occur. Potentially something like the unique student identifier could really be changed and support some of that. But I think it needs to be a place where it's central and where someone as an employer or a student they can go to one place and they can see all of that information. The student gets the decision around whether they want to make that information public or private. And an employer, should they want to look for talent, can go somewhere and find that individual. So I think it's a really big question and one that I think we'll need to try and solve fairly soon.
Great answers. It is a very. I thought, oh gosh, I'm handing him a hand.
No, you did well.
You did very well because it is. It's how it's a huge question. So I'm going to the last comment that's just come up, question that's come in the chat box, I think is a fabulous way for us to draw this conversation to a close. So I'm going to ask you both to reflect on how will students navigate and make choices in this widening selection. And just before you answer, I do want to point out that because I read all the reviews and nerd that I am, this is something in the Australian vet sector where we are going to see more publicly available data on providers that will help student choices, and also audit reports be published, not in the same content and format. So there will be some more publicly comparable information at the provider level that is coming, but with that not here yet, and as way of background, the future is going to get more complex. How are students going to make good choices? Trevor, I'll start with you, and then Vivienne, you'll have the last word. So Trevor, your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, Claire, and it was interesting. I think I caught on the ABC News last night a story around NAPLAN, for example, for secondary schools. And I know as a parent, when you're reviewing secondary schools, you've got a ranking system, which you can use as a determining factor around where you'd send your child. I do wonder whether there will be something like that in vet, or even in I guess in higher ed. There is rankings around universities and that sort of thing. So I do wonder whether there will be something like that, because the choice is pretty significant when you think about it. Like 4,000 plus registered training organisations, some public, some private. How does a student determine which is the best place to go? And they need access to information to be able to do that, and they need to be able to consume that information in a really simple way so that they can make a choice. So I think things like student satisfaction and reviews and all of those sorts of things will start to come to the fore. And it becomes a real marketplace, where individuals can self-select what they think is most appropriate, but they need easy information that they can consume to make that decision. So I think, again, things like the reputation of the training organisation will be pretty significant. We know word of mouth is such a significantly powerful marketing tool. So I think there's so many elements to that, but I think some form of simple system where a student can go somewhere and have key information that's consistent across a number of different providers to then make an informed decision, I think will be important.
Terrific, thank you. And Vivienne, your final thoughts on this one?
Oh, it's a doozy. Maybe we'll have Yelp for education. What do you think? Look, I echo what Trevor has been saying. The only thing I would add is the ability to be able to work out the relevance, because not every course will be the same. Maybe the content will, but the delivery is going to be up to the individual institutions. So it's about job placement. Did the students get what they were looking for? So if they were looking for knowledge, how do we get them to be able to share that information so that it can be looked at? If they're looking for job placement, how many of the graduates within those areas actually got jobs? And then how well do the employees rate those students? And I think that's a difficult one, but that information is available. I mean, you can go to many sites. It really, I think, is going to come down to that sort of formal information that you're talking about, Claire, that will be published and will be rated in time. But on top of that, there needs to be something more that allows someone to understand why they want to go into, a vocational education sector rather than, say, a rated university of, the top 4 or 5. And to sort of close out, I mean, I know that one of the big 4 consulting groups for the last 3 years have been taking their university graduates and putting them back into vocational education for them to enhance their skills so that they get a well-rounded employee. I think that says it all, actually. It's been happening. It's going to continue to happen even more.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And I think the last thing that I would add to that is for those who are starting out, so Trevor, you're thinking about, school students and how parents take those decisions. If we're going into what should I do, and Vivienne, you touched on this, what should I do post-school? I think the establishment of the National Careers Institute is a good initiative, which will help provide ready access to information on careers, and then start thinking about, okay, these are the courses that would take me into that first of my many careers, Vivienne, and then which providers have a good reputation in those particular course and careers areas, because I think that's the second order. You've got institutional reputation, but actually, let's face it, large complex institutions, whether they're universities, TAFEs, or some larger private providers, it's not a uniform experience. And it might well be that provider X is fantastic in IT and okay at nursing, or vice versa. And if you want to do plumbing, there's some that are really the best in that. So I think I'll be looking with interest as to how that National Careers Institute continues to grow, and what information they're putting out, and how that fits with the greater information that we have on providers. Now, I don't know about you, but time on my clock says 10:16, and I thought we were going to 10:15. I can keep talking, but are we supposed to be going somewhere else? Edugrowth, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Oh, it looks like it. We keep singing and done. I thought we were doing well, and we're coming up. Oh, there's Hope now. Very good. I was trying to bring us in on time this time.
Thank you very much, guys. I was waiting to be put back on, and thoroughly enjoyed that. Thank you very much. Very interesting information and discussion there from Claire, Vivienne, and Trevor. Thank you for giving us an insight on successful education and industry partnership models. Absolutely love the concept of authentic blended learning design experiences to effectively engage our learners. So once again, thank you very much for your time in joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having us.
Awesome. So now we will take a short break and resume with a panel discussion at 10:30. And this will be on trends in skills education. In the meantime, please stick around to watch some videos from some of our EduPro members. See you again soon.
Welcome to Practera. Let's make experiential learning better together. Most of what we learn in life happens through practical experience. We learn by doing in the real world every day, but we learn so much more, and the experience is so much better when we do this with the right support. What if you could click a button and create a perfectly supported real-world learning experience? An awesome internship, an inspiring mentoring program, an energised volunteering activity. It would be fun and engaging, with plenty of opportunities to connect theory with practice. Coaching, feedback and support would happen at exactly the right time. Most importantly, it would be easy to manage, whether there were 10, 100 or 1,000 participants. You can do this today with Practera. Practera helps educators design and deliver amazing experiential learning. Whether you're in higher education or in corporate training, you'll find that using Practera makes it easier to learn from experience and to gain mastery over new skills like critical thinking, communication, collaboration or creativity. Practera drives learning through reflection and feedback tools that have been validated by leading education researchers. Participants learn together, collaborate, stay in sync and keep on track using engaging mobile apps that can be customised to your needs and brand. You as the educator have total control. Practera gives you actionable data and insights so you can improve engagement and project outcomes. You can start immediately by using one of our award-winning templates, or work with our experts to build your own unique experience within hours. Try Practera today and let's work together to close the gap between knowledge and skills. Ask us for a demo. Browse our templates on marketplace.practera.com and be part of the future of experiential learning.
The rapid pace of technology innovation is fundamentally changing the education industry. Entrepreneurs like you are pushing the boundaries and creating groundbreaking solutions for students, teachers, and educational establishments. But enacting this change in a secure, scalable, and cost-effective way can be extremely difficult. Amazon Web Services Education Technology Accelerator, AWS EdStart, was built to reduce these barriers and allow you to focus on creating the next generation of online learning, analytics, and campus management solutions, and ultimately revolutionizing the education industry. From design to global scale, AWS EdStart offers many powerful resources to quickly develop your applications on the AWS platform. To get started, simply visit aws.amazon.com/AWS EdStart and submit your application today.
Welcome to salesessentials.com, the essential resource for people anywhere in the world to enhance their sales capabilities. Sales Essentials believes that selling is everybody's business and everybody lives by selling something. Whether you have an idea, product, service or opportunity that you want to take to market, or you need to influence key stakeholders, then you need to be able to sell ethically, honourably and effectively. Today, selling is about the fair exchange of value, where people buy from people they trust. And in turn, the buyer and the seller achieve real results and prosperous, viable relationships. Hello, I'm Sue Barrett, founder and CEO of salesessentials.com and Barrett Consulting Group. Since 1995, we've been working with thousands of people around the world, giving them access to practical and effective sales tools and education with outstanding results. We've even got selling a university qualification, but the challenge has always been how to give people access to useful sales, education and resources away from the classroom. This is how the idea of an online self-help sales education training and resource platform came about. At salesessentials.com, you can do any manner of assessments that give you calibration on your current level of sales capability, or information about what critical decisions you need to make about key accounts, competitors or strategy. So whether you're a professional salesperson looking to hone or develop your skills, or you're looking to start your own business, or you're new to sales and service, and even if you're an internal stakeholder looking to engage more effectively with others, then salesessentials.com has been built for you by an international team with a global marketplace in mind. You can keep your sales knowledge, skills and mindset up to date by enrolling in our flagship Sales Essentials online course, an 8-module program giving you the foundations of sales success. And Module 0 is complimentary, just to make sure it's the right program for you. We invite you to take a look around. You can choose as little or as much as you like, and you can choose what you want when you need it. So welcome to salesessentials.com, the essential resource for people anywhere in the world to enhance their sales capabilities.
At Dog-Eared, we believe reading unlocks a lifetime love of learning. Our innovative digital reading log platform builds student reading skills and provides parents and teachers the tools to foster those habits. Keeping track of daily reading is easy by simply scanning a book's ISBN code or searching the database within the app. Students are able to record their progress daily with fun avatars and rating systems. Comprehension questions can be answered, as well as voice recordings and assistive reading prompts to capture progression throughout the school year. A visual activity feed and badge system rounds out a complete feedback loop between the student and school. Messaging and book recommendations from the teacher ensures the student's experience is enjoyable and habit building. In the classroom, Dog-Eared provides an engaging view of the class's reading activity over time. Our book database highlights students' reviews and ratings, as well as the ability for teachers to recommend and share books with the class. Activities is a smartboard-friendly view of the class's current reading activities and provides elements of social responsibility. And a complete student list ensures teachers can see individual reading rates and statistics. With a simple click, you are able to see a complete student reading profile with activities, reading streaks, favourite books and authors, and the messages and badges they have received. Our bookshelf system allows teachers to browse books by reading level, year, and state challenges. Report writing and end-of-term data gathering is quick and painless, with all data securely available and exportable. Dog-Eared is the most simple and powerful way to ensure your students develop essential reading habits. Book a demo today.
Hi, I'm Dr. Rob, and yes, that's me with the watermelon. I'll explain why a little bit later. But first, let me introduce my new project. It's called Experimentary, and it's a whole new way for schools to bring science into the classroom. It's a digital resource, but with experiments at its core. So it's online, but the students are still getting their hands on science. It's learning by doing. The experiments are introduced and explained by me in short, easy-to-follow videos. Students can then use their online lab book to record the ideas and the progress of their experiments. When they're finished, they can also be presented or compared and discussed. And there's real-life examples of how the science involved relates to the world we live in. Importantly, everything is linked back to the curriculum, so you can see what's covered. And it's not just science, there's engineering, technology and maths too, so it's really a bit of a STEM thing. As well as the raft of classroom-ready experiments, we've also got Science at Home, where the curious can continue to explore in their own time. Now back to that watermelon, which is about to implode. That is part of the big experiment, where a whole class conducts one big experiment and then compares their results with students from around Australia. It's our version of citizen science. There's an old Chinese saying, I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand. Well, from my experience, kids love getting their hands stuck into science and doing it. And that's where Experimentary is here to help.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you all had a good short break and had some time to make yourselves a nice cup of tea. We'll now be moving on to the next part of our program on the topic of trends in skills education online globally. With great honor, I would like to introduce our session moderator, Pauline Farrell. Pauline is the Managing Director at Skills for the Future. Pauline is a learning transformation and learning innovation specialist. Her current research interests focus on on the future of work and how education can evolve to meet the emerging needs of the workforce. She works globally across the education technology and disruptive technologies sector. Welcome, Pauline.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the welcome. I actually have the great pleasure today of also introducing Sean Steele. Sean, in the last 15 years, has been leading the development and growth of corporate training, accredited vet and higher ed, and industry certified business. In the last 3.5 years, he's been the group CEO at AdventureCo, which is an education portfolio that's been tackling skill changes primarily in technology and trades across APAC. So part of that role has been taking IT training brands DDLS to #1 in Australia for cybersecurity, which is something dear to my heart. Finalist of Startup of the Year, revenue growth in technology courses for career entrants, and took their Australian capability into Asia with joint ventures into the Philippines and Myanmar and Indonesia. And that's part of what we'll be chatting about today. He's also had closed a successful chapter with EdTech. Sean doesn't reveal too much about what he wants to do yet, man of mystery, but he's certainly going to be working across the Australian EdTech industry scale-ups and working with investors and developing global online entrepreneurship boot camps for 12 to 17-year-olds, which is certainly a growing area. So welcome, Sean.
Thanks very much, Pauline. Cheers.
Okay, so part of the topic today, and hopefully we'll have lots of questions from this topic because I know it's very relevant to many of us, is the topic focus is talking about some of the new skills that will be required to respond to a changing economy, not only domestically, but globally. And we're going to be talking a bit about some of the international trends in skills education sector, and also looking specifically at online delivery and who's going to need reskilling, upskilling and skilling, and how Australian education providers can take some of their IP offshore as we start to expand our understanding and our products within this space. So that's sort of a bit of a context, and just to frame it for you, Sean and I have sort of really 3 key things, given it's a whole 30 minutes, probably 27 minutes now, 3 key topics that we really want to focus on. One is, to succeed offshore, we need localisation, and to get localisation, you need partners. The second key message that we're really going to look at is education providers need to move from developing and selling content or products to solving market problems with education products, and that's an absolute core expertise of Sean, and we're lucky to have him here. And the final part is a little bit of a chat about the value of brand and the changing nature of how employers view skills and education, and we'll talk a bit about micro and macro credentials. So fairly full agenda, but I'm sure we'll be able to get through it. I think I'm well known for talking way too fast, so I'll try and slow it down. So last part of framing this session is to talk a bit about that transformational nature of the skills agenda. And Sean and I just wanted to briefly talk about the policy agenda and the policy context, that with COVID-19, I don't need to tell anybody here something they don't know, but the disruption has been significant, and I don't think we've even realised how pervasive and how much it's going to change what's happening. When you start to look at the policy context, particularly around the new AQF framework, you look at the new skills agenda from both a federal and a state point of view, we are ripe for really revisiting and reviewing where we're at, and perhaps really challenging and recalibrating our current thinking around what products are. Into that context, I'd say some of the discussions we've had to listen to, there was a really interesting guy on Monday who talked about the fact that they had a subscription model for doing an MBA. Up to, cheapest was $19 a month in India. They had millions of customers. They brought in subject matter experts, aka academics, purely for the theory component, but over half of those courses were very much grounded. Their growth was exponential, and it was very much around a business model. I think some of those transitions and transformations are really worth looking at. The only other thing I wanted to say in terms of this context is that as we talk about the international trends, the motivators, as you all know, are very, very different. Sean and I talked a bit about the fact that a $32,000 master's is quite common in Australia. Some of that is aspirational. We're quite brand sensitive, slowly changing. However, when you start to move over into some of the Southeastern Asian countries, some of the motivators are very different. Aspiration is still there, but it's really around some of those job outcomes, community needs, and financial capacity to actually deliver a living, a workable wage. So without further ado, I'm going to get on to the really important person in this discussion, which isn't me, it's Sean. And we're going to talk a bit about, so what do you think the future of skills training actually is in your experience, Sean?
Yeah, it's a good question, isn't it? I mean, there are so many skills that are required, but I'm sure nobody would be surprised, A, given my background, and B, just given everything that they see around them in terms of how rapidly companies and governments are accelerating the digitization of their products and services. It's not like it was not happening pre-COVID and now all of a sudden it's happening, but the acceleration has been pretty amazing. And so I think, I've seen this sort of need for I know I mentioned the word digital literacy, and you had a better word for it, which I'll hand back to you in a minute, Pauline. But just as an example, that sort of digital literacy broadly defined for consumers and workforces is incredibly important. And when I talk about that, I'm not talking about in that context, not necessarily people doing technology jobs, but it's an enabler of sort of economic progress for companies. It's an enabler of career transition. It's a sort of evolution or protection of livelihood for consumers. And again, it follows that trend towards, digitization of products and services. But to give a sense of like how different that might be, in Australia, we might be saying, well, actually, we're really keen for people to get familiar with a whole bunch of different kind of workforce software applications, or maybe learn a bit about AI because they might have to work with some programs in the future. But in conversations that I had in the Philippines, where you've got 110 million people spread across 2,000 islands, actually just learning how to use Excel and giving them the basic capabilities for a really sort of elementary startup kind of context to create micro businesses, that is actually fundamentally a more important level of digital literacy than we might be experiencing in the Australian workforce in different kinds of sectors. So that's one. And then probably the other one for me is actually technology skills more narrowly defined, like specific jobs in technology, software engineers, developers, cybersecurity, data analytics, the words that we've been seeing emerge for probably the last couple of years, but it's only accelerating. I don't know if it was Seek's report, but there was a report last week where 15 of the 26 fastest growing jobs are all technology related. So you can't run away from it. It's going to happen. I'm continuing to try to teach my 15-year-old where some of the opportunities are going to be, and for some reason he's not interested in coding. But anyway, there are other skills that are required.
I'm thinking of going back to school, doing some coding. Could be cool. Agreed. And what else? You talked also about that global jobs can be done anywhere and any time. How do you think COVID is going to actually drive that even further, or are we just on the same growth trajectory?
Well, I think actually what's kind of exciting is if you think about all the language that we heard sort of proliferate around the gig economy in the last several years, COVID's actually changing the way. It's not only changing, of course, where people think they can live and work, but it's sort of pushing people towards micro entrepreneurship and freelancing and gig economy, and that actually again requires that sort of some level of digital capability, because most of these people are having to work in businesses that they haven't done before, create little startups, but creating new opportunities for financial independence and prosperity and livelihood. But that global orientation has changed just rapidly. I mean, I've heard people, even though virtual assistants have been around for so long, I heard somebody who just moved, from Melbourne to Ballarat because that's where she wanted to be, and all of a sudden she'd created the virtual assistants business, and she'd been in a corporate job 9 to 5, 5 days a week in the office, and it was just such a simple of an example where COVID's created a capacity to work somewhere different, but she's needed new skills to actually create that sort of income.
And how do you think micro and macro credentials will potentially provide a framework for some of this skills acquisition? And we'll come back to this. This is sort of, just a starter.
Yeah, I'd be interested in your perspective on that because I'm really excited to see. I'm very excited to see micro credentials getting airtime. To be frank, and I'm not too. I don't get too caught up in the word micro credentials and exactly what it means. And I think we heard from it was Beverly Oliver the other day about it. Well, it's kind of almost anything that's not a full course, but it's a small part of it, and it could be done in a million different ways, and there's not sort of super clear definitions. But I think there's a role to play. I think there is a role to play for the AQF in creating that, and I know that we'll probably talk a little bit later. I just think I always get nervous about, we have some really fantastic education institutions in the country, but I think there can be a lot of inward thinking or sort of inside out thinking where they see a skills problem, and so they look to the AQF and go, okay, what's available on the AQF, and then how do I just take that, develop content, and then sell it to a market? And I really just think that's upside down.
Yeah.
I think that's sort of, Mr. Squiggle, we have to start with the problem. We have to start with the skill that needs to be trained, who the customer's going, or who the student's going to be, what's their capability, capacity, time, when are they going to be starting, all those things, and then actually figure out what the solution is in the middle. If that happens to be, if there's value in the AQF playing part of that solution, fabulous, great, and there'll be lots of examples where it is, but there's also lots of examples where it isn't. And I think we can be a bit, because we sort of love regulation in this country, and that's served us really well in lots of ways, we can also start with regulatory impost and framework first, and then problem and solution second. And I think it's got to be the other way around.
It's really interesting. We talked about one of the projects I've worked on this year is actually globally mapping the skills of the future. And what became really clear was there was a consistent set of skills that sat globally that businesses and people were looking for. And we divided them really clearly into three key chunks. And one was human and entrepreneurship skills or enterprise skills. And they were, ye old that are never going away. We've talked about this, Sean. Things like teamwork and collaboration and the people that have survived and done well. And Simon Hahn made a good point about this yesterday. The people in his business that absolutely gunned it were those that could actually work together and work collaboratively. The second group, which is the one you alluded to about digital literacy, is around those technical skills. But interestingly, some of the digital literacy, like you use the example of Excel, we can embed those quite nicely within the school system if we start to really review what the underpinning skill requirements of the school system are. But I think there's a massive growth area around digital capability. Around it's a given that you're going to have to do virtual, collaborating online, and you're going to have to be understanding the new technologies. And the final part, which is probably some of the new thinking, was giving students both at secondary and post-secondary really embedding those career exploration opportunities, because we shunt kids in to silos really early on, whereas we need them to be able to pivot these skills for the future. They need to be able to pivot and move jobs and move and acquire. Like you said before, Sean, learn to learn and the process of learning. So really interesting. So I'm very aware of time. So let's move on and talk a bit about some of the emerging trends. You've identified a couple of trends that you've definitely seen in all your global travels, and ultimately there's three big ones we wanted to talk about. So let's talk a bit about the first trend, which is the need for localization and the need for partnerships. So talk to us a bit about what have you seen, what's your experience been, and what can you share with us?
I think this is an interesting one because part of the whole context of EduGrowth, which is so fantastic, is we've got this incredible ecosystem of edtech entrepreneurs, some that are quite mature stages and some that are just still in early stage startup stage, which I think was nicely sort of articulated in the Austrade presentation the other day. And many, of course, have aspiration to take that capability offshore, as do many very mature, very large-scale universities, TAFEs, private vocational providers, private higher education providers, and so on. And so there's a lot of expertise in Australia. And in the last sort of 3.5 years, I spent a fair bit of time looking at how do we purchase Australian assets and Australian capability. That may not be content, that may actually just be capability, i.e. people and their sort of their intellect. It could be systems, could be a range of things. How do we take that and use that to try to tackle some challenges in Asia, which of course is not one market, it's many different markets. But what I've really noticed in that process was this real need towards ultra personalization. So if you think about the last several years, we've had some really big platforms, the Udemys and the LinkedIn Learnings and Skillsofts and so on, some big content platforms. And when they were all sort of shiny and new, I think people were quite willing to accept a non-localized sort of approach. It was like, oh, look at this amazing platform, it's great, it's not really quite what I want, but there's clearly a lot of value here. And what seems to be really interesting at the moment is this really, if you think about our own personal lives, everything's becoming ultra personalized. Our expectation is that we don't want off the shelf stuff. We want it to feel like it's ours. And in Asia, what I noticed is there is a really strong, like the Australian brand in and around training and education is strong. There's a reputation for quality, but what they want, whether it's investors or family offices or large companies or other educators, what they want is credible education partners. They may not need a big brand, like it doesn't have to be a university or so on. They're generally really interested in solving a local market problem, but what they're looking for is someone who can come in and understand the problem and then design and adjust an education product. They're expecting that you're going to bring IP, but they're also expecting that you're going to actually personalise that for their local market, and therefore have to think about it differently.
So when you think about the partners that you work with, how do you select those partners, in your experience, to really make that personalisation and customisation resonate for that specific country? And, you know, we've talked about it, my experience in it, sometimes that's hard to find.
Yeah, I think actually probably one of the most, I think there's different kinds of partners. There's the partner that you may end up needing, like a sort of joint venture partner. I actually really like to see a financial partner. And the reason, who's got enough breadth of relationships, can help you get past red tape, can help you find the right industry partners, actually almost finding the financial partner, whether that's a family office or a large group of companies or an investor who's actually really trying to solve a problem but needs the education partner. If you can get somebody who's financially invested in you with that, it creates a really strong alignment. Everybody's got the same objective, the same goal, and quite often there's regulatory requirements to do so as well. You then may need a content partner because maybe your content doesn't, blow me down. Maybe the content isn't a perfect fit with what you've got to solve the problem, and maybe you'll need, a technology or a delivery partner to kind of help you deliver that whether it's a different language or a different support model or something. But I do think that partnership element is key, and finding partners is not always easy. I guess we've been quite lucky that we've leveraged networks. We've got quite extensive network. We've always tried to leverage networks in high net worth individuals and family offices and larger companies. But I think actually trying to find a financial partner first has been a real key to success for us.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the emerging trend too, which there's a couple of questions coming through, and some of them around one piece of advice do you have for an edtech company looking to move overseas, and what are some of the roles that an organisation like EduVenture Co has taken. And I think the emerging trend you've identified for the next one, which is really around education product design, not just content design. So if the producer could put up those slides for us now, I think it might answer some of these questions around how you positioned solutions and the business at the time. So it might answer some of those questions. So over to you, Sean.
Yeah, sure. I'll try to tackle those questions at the same time. In short, I'm not going to talk through this slide in detail or either the two examples, but I feel like, and I know this is a really simple premise, but I feel like we can really fall into the trap of loving our own IP and loving our own, whether it's content or a platform or whatever, and kind of forgetting that the role of educators is to, especially in the skills context, is to actually figure out what the problem is and who the student's going to be, and then actually build the ingredients to get there. So if you think about that slide, I won't go through it all, but there's a lot of different dimensions to how you build an education product. And when I say education product, I'm not talking about a qualification. I'm thinking about it like a product. Does it actually need an accreditation? If it is it AQF? Is it industry certified? Does it need to scaffold into some other program? Does it need to lead to something else? Where's the student going to be? How are they going to learn? When are they going to learn? Which technology is the best kind? How do we give them the right experience? Do they need support after to get a job, change a job, upskill, get a promotion, whatever it is? And it's kind of taking the approach of going, let me be the problem solver, and let me put together the right mix of ingredients to solve the problem. And the next, just to give you one quick example, if you just flick to the next slide, the next two slides is just an example. I'm not going to go through it in detail, but there's a contemporary problem in Australia, which is we don't actually have enough cybersecurity analysts. Full stop. We've got a big undersupply of cybersecurity analysts. It's only going to be growing as a problem. There are absolutely multiple providers out there, but we have a AQF attempt to solve the problem, which requires a year of study, 2 to 3 days on campus, every single week, face to face in the classroom. Still very original delivery style, if you like. And then the following slide was a private sector example that we saw, where it started with the industry first. So, the red items are, slightly different approaches. Rather than a year, it takes 4 to 6 months. And actually, students and industry care about speed. It's industry certified rather than AQF accredited. Now, is that better or worse? Well, it really depends on what the employers want, and the employers are actually asking for industry certification.
Well,
how do you get that?
One of the things that's changed around the AQF review is that it's no longer like you don't have to put in the time, it's around hours. So if you want to shunt that into a really short time frame, then at least the AQF is starting to respond to that, boot camp, fast track type approach. Sort of reflecting on that part around that customisation, there's a couple of questions here around what do you think the real opportunity in taking Aussie education to Southeast Asia actually is? Where do we stand out? Where's our what's our differentiator that makes us really attractive as a partner?
That's such a good question, because I don't think there's one answer. It'd be really nice if I just had a silver bullet for that one. I don't think there's one answer. I think actually what is respected in, when you spend time in places like Myanmar or Singapore or Indonesia or Philippines, there is generally Australian education, full stop, is put up a level. International education with quality brands is put up a level in terms of the level of respect. Brand is just ultra important in Asia. And that doesn't mean you have to be a university. What it means is they're expecting that when you walk in, you're going to have a higher level of sophistication in actually helping them create a quality experience, but they still want that expected localization. One of the questions I can see there is about how do you then choose who to work with in international markets? And one thing I would say is, there's a lot of things that go into that. But if you're exploring potential partnerships, you just have to you have to remember that you're going to be in this relationship for a really long time. And so the alignment around, you may end up with different values, but the alignment around intention, the alignment around how are we going to get out of this in the future and what do we want both out of it? And how do we set up, are we both willing to set this up in such a way where the partnership has got all the glue and all the governance and all the structure and relationship so that if anybody leaves the partnership, that the thing continues on and people fall into the trap I see all the time of getting a bit greedy and trying to make sure it's a bit more win-lose than win-win. And all I can say is if you're 2 years into a partnership and one partner's losing more than the other, there's going to be a lot of resentment and you're going to have wasted 2 years and you're going to be back to square one trying to find a new partner. So I know that's sort of basic principles. It's hard to assess them, but those things are actually fundamental in making an offshore partnership work.
Okay, sounds good. Last part of today, wanted to sort of talk a little bit about micro-credentialing and the value of brand. And one of the things that came across my desk, thank you, Hal, was a discussion or a statistic. Have I validated it yet? No, I haven't. So I could be doing fake news, which we're all sensitive to. 48% of Google employees, don't have a degree, and we're starting to look now at places like Google, which up until last year was the most aspired workplace for employees. So the fact that people want to work there and they're setting agendas around education not even being part of a resume, they want you to articulate what skills you have and to be able to show not just the skills you have, but how you've delivered on that tangibly, which is really interesting. And I think IT is a really different space in that we talked before about, the boot camp experience and the fact that we need to be embedding skill sets and embedding micro and macro credentials for real time is critical. And so I think this whole value of brand is a really interesting discussion. You've talked about how brand sensitive Southeast Asia is. In terms of sort of micro credentials and the value of the brand, where do you see, briefly, and we're not going to solve the world in the next 3 minutes, where do you see the value of micro credentials in Asia? And then where do you see some of the challenges that, the big, hairy, sticky problems we haven't solved yet that, quite frankly, it feels like it's still early days?
I think we are seeing for me, it's incredibly exciting because we are actually going to see companies create a significant access to a diverse employee base that they didn't have before. Because to be frank, when you have a degree qualification requirement for every job in your company, you actually massively reduce the diversity of the workforce and the talent you have access to. And we can see that, I'm not telling anyone anything doesn't know, we're seeing all sorts of really large companies just get rid of degrees as a requirement full stop, or to your point, I think around Google, not even having it as, don't want to see the sort of education background, want to understand the skills. Obviously for candidates, that's a market signal saying, actually, you know what, starting to build a CV where you've done a London Business School, 3-day course in strategy and a 2-day Harvard course in XYZ, that is actually going to become not only accepted, but desired and start to be more accepted by employers. However, therefore brand becomes a lot more important, right? Is the brand already reputable? Is there some accreditation around it? How are employers going to sort of sort through the wheat and the chaff as to what they're going to value? And I think that's going to be quite messy for quite a long time. But slowly, quality will rise to the top. assessment of the badging and the certification will rise to the top of the best players. But I actually think that's a really exciting opportunity. If all of a sudden, is there any employer who's going to think that a Google, technology certificate done in 4 to 6 months online is going to be poor quality? Google's never going to do anything like that. So you're going to get immediate recognition for employers. Oh, you did it with Google. That's probably going to be pretty good. I'm not really sure.
Is there an opportunity for Australia? And this keeps resonating through my mind and thinking about what Beverly Oliver's had and my experience and background in working in badging and micro-credentials over the last 5 years. And, and some of those have been global macro-credential projects. What I'm really aware of is the AQF review has come out and it's allowed us to now start to put some consistency. I think my concern is that, in the old days in the short courses, there was no equivalency. So what you're talking about brand resonating, at what point do we start to say a micro-credential is actually the equivalent of, or we can stack and build these. So people have got options then to either layer them into, if they want to, and quite frankly, industry doesn't care, but the mum and dad, they might, into a postgrad or into some units into a diploma. Is that just irrelevant, or is it a smart move for Australia to actually build a framework by which those equivalencies can grow? Yeah. And it really speaks to your point about the value of Australian branding qualifications and skills and training overseas.
Yeah.
Feel free to dispute. Go for gold.
No, I think there's absolutely value in being able to sort of build your own qualification. There's still value in the AQF, right? There's still employer recognition of the value of a structured degree with good theoretical underpinning, whether it's degree or masters and so on. So I think that's an opportunity. I don't know though, and my experience certainly in places like Myanmar was, we care that you're an international brand. We care about being able to create a pathway to a local university. It doesn't need to be an Australian one. An offshore. We were looking at a UK university already operating in Myanmar. We want to be able to create pathways for students to the university. But to be perfectly frank, what we really care is that they can they've got the technology skills that they need to do the job at the end, and the employers will recognise the certification they have. So what they wanted was, they wanted CompTIA cybersecurity certification. They wanted Cisco networking certification. They want Microsoft, AI, Azure fundamentals. They want the industry stamp. They're less concerned with our AQF and our view of how important and wonderful and structured it is. So I think in Australia, it's probably going to be far more important than Australia taking that micro-credential into Asia.
Okay, so we've got about 4 minutes left. So let's sort of power through some of these questions. And there's some really good questions that you've already answered. Let's pick a few that perhaps there's a question here about what are some of the key in-house capabilities that overseas partners expect in an EdTech company?
Yeah, do you know what? This is actually where I think we've got a real opportunity, because some people can fall into the trap of thinking, well, the person who's going to succeed in getting that big opportunity to do something at scale is going to be an Australian university because they've got brand and they've got resources and all the rest. But to be frank, that's actually certainly not my experience. My experience is those partners who want to see impact in Asia, they want it tomorrow. Like, they want it so fast. They want to start this thing immediately. And so they need players that are agile, that will really tack and change and will customize for the local market. Now, EdTech is a big category, right? So I can't say, what's the in-house capability for every EdTech player. It could be software, it could be content, it could be a million things. But I think that willingness to identify why that goal for them is a problem. Is it about national prosperity? Is it about solving a specific industry or market problem? Like in the Philippines, their BPO sector, the process outsourcing sector is under massive threat of disruption. That's a national problem because it's such a big component of GDP. So they care about fixing that because it's the livelihood of 1.5 million workers. That's why it matters. So they then want somebody who will move really fast, who'll do whatever's required to create a solution, and they're less concerned about, do you already come with a big brand? They want you to have brand that shows expertise, no question, but there's also a bit of sort of inferred expertise because you can bring an international brand to the market. So I think it's about agility and alignment and actually care factor about doing it right and getting it right. But you have to be able to do it faster, cheaper, at scale. You have to do it in an economic way where, to your point, they're not going to pay $32,000 for an Australian master's degree. Well, that's not going to be the biggest opportunity. You want to do that in the Philippines with 110 million people who are all on mobile but have the worst internet you can imagine. You're going to have to deliver this in a mobile experience in and around the 4.5 hours they spend a day on Facebook.
International projects I had and shall go unnamed, where 2.5 million was spent on building a second life cruise ship. And that was great. It was really funky, and I thought it was amazing. But the big problem was none of the students had a computer that could run it. They didn't have the graphic capabilities. Got to design for what we need. Okay, last question. And thanks for all the questions that have come through. They've been really, really interesting. Is there an overseas skills market that we should emulate in their embrace of online delivery? You know, who in your mind are the guns? And I think there's multiple answers to that, Sean, around who's established but who's growing at speed and will probably overtake some of the more traditional online players. So what are your thoughts, just to finish us off?
Well, I mean, there are some incredible businesses in terms of structure and professionalism and really great value propositions, to be frank, still in the UK and the US that I look to, and in Europe that I just think are doing some amazing things. I know there's, the Holland IQ guys are producing some fantastic reports that I'm continually digging into to see who else is doing what. That's amazing. But there is so much in Asia that's already having impact, knows that they've got to do it with scale, knows they've got to do it incredibly low cost, like your Indian example at $19 a month for a university degree. You know, I actually think those are the people to emulate, because they don't start with, we can afford to do this, it can take a while, it could be a bit slower. You have to do it in a very different way with a different context. So I think the examples are already in those markets.
I think the other one that are really worth watching, and I say this cautiously, there's a couple of Southeast Asian countries that have invested billions of dollars in the last probably 2 years. I think they're going to frog leap, jump some of the other countries, because they'll learn from the rest. So I won't call them out, but yeah, lots of countries doing really, really well, particularly in the skills market. England does some really good stuff. They've always been a standout. Germany, amazing. And quite frankly, watching Finland very, very carefully, because what they've done in the school system is now bleeding into the workplace. So I think there's a lot of places we can watch. Sean, thank you so much for your work. I'll just reiterate. So we sort of covered off a bit about to succeed offshore, you need localization and need partners. We need to develop solutions rather than trying to resell product, and the value of brand and the changing nature of employees' bill SKUs and micro and macro credentials. So we've covered a lot in a short time. Thank you, Sean. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Pauline. Thanks, Hope.
Thank you so much, Pauline and Sean. What a great session, really, to be made aware of global trends in skills education, for continuous upskilling and reskilling, particularly within the online space. So I'm 100% that our delegates had so much to take away from your discussion. So thank you again very much.
Pleasure.
Moving on, our next session is about adapting to an online environment. We started our morning with discussions on regulations on education and innovation, to bridging gaps between education, employability, and innovation, to learning about the current trends in online delivery for skills development. So now we shall move into how can we actually adapt learning in this new online environment. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our moderator for the next session. Please welcome Bianca Raby. Bianca is founder of and has over 14 years experience as an educator. She founded Oppida in 2019 to raise the bar in online learning globally. To date, Oppida has served dozens of clients by designing, developing, migrating, and enhancing their online programs and courses. Welcome, Bianca. I will now hand it over to you.
Thank you, Hope. What a beautiful intro. I'm from Oppida, and you can see by the backdrop. One of our missions is to raise the bar in online learning. So this is one of my favorite topics, and I'm really excited to introduce Anthony from Cahoot Learning. He's going to be joining me today on this discussion. Anthony and I bonded years ago, or it feels like years ago, but actually I think it was only 18 months ago, around our love for online learning and what's possible. So we're really excited about this conversation. Anthony, did you want to introduce yourself and a little bit about Cahoot before we get into the questions?
Sure, thanks, Bianca. And my God, look at you. That's sensational. Talking about raising the bar. I'm feeling I'm a little bit underdone here coming to you from my kitchen table, but that is sensational. So look, thank you for the intro. And look, thanks to the team at EduGrowth, with Dave and his team there, Carolyn and the team at Global Victoria, for the opportunity to speak. This has been brilliant. I've been dipping in and out through over the last couple of days, and it's been some fantastic conversations. I was really enjoying Sean's talk just before, and I had to jump out to go into our green room discussion. But gee, it's been really valuable. So a big thank you on that side of it. I've got a lot out of it. I've learned a lot. So look, just really briefly, Cahoot. we have, we've had we're approaching something about 1.8 million learners through our virtual doors.
Wow, I didn't know you guys. That's great.
It is. There's been lots of the door is getting a bit wonky, and 126 countries around the world. So we've been in many ways a bit of a silent achiever, sitting in the background of things that go on. Just today, we just wrapped up a program with the ATO. We had over 1,000 people in that session that wrapped up this morning, and so our whole approach to things has been, and the gap that we saw, the problem that we saw to want to solve, was the nature of digital education back in sort of early 2011 sort of thing, 2010, 2011. There was starting to be a lot of talk about access, and obviously the MOOCs then came out a couple of years after that, but access and to from a digital sort of point of view to from a scaling perspective and so on. But what we weren't seeing and what we felt was left at the door were people in many ways.
Yeah.
And what we saw is that if we could bring together a community of people who are, and our involvement is in the professional education world, so we're talking sort of the 24, 25 years through to 100 years old in terms of our demographic that we work with. But you've got so much experience, so much knowledge coming in those doors, which adds so much value to learning. So yes, we can get great content and great speakers and we're talking about really interesting things. But when you bring that cohort together to actually explore and bring their experience and knowledge to the table, it becomes incredibly valuable and incredibly practical. So that's been our model, our philosophy all the way along. And so it's really about how we create relationship and community in a digital space. So that's the nuts and bolts of the Cahoot model.
Yeah, which is why I think we bonded so quickly because, Oppida is all about student-centered and really thinking about what it is we need to do to enable them to have, the best experience, but also get the best outcomes. And I really love the social learning community model that you guys have been sort of waving the flag for. And I guess that is, that's where we want to start today, I guess, in the sense of, actually, we're going to get to that question later because we're going to talk about the design principles for online. But first of all, I think it'll be interesting to hear from you, Anthony, how you believe we've had to shift our mindsets because digital learning has not just started; it hasn't just appeared. We've been doing this thing for a while. But what is it about the mindsets that we need to shift when we're trying to create high quality online educational products or courses or whatever you want to call them?
Yeah, look, and I think that's the perfect place to start. It's where we must start. It's at the level of how we're approaching these things. And look, speaking of which, I'd really invite, everyone who's listening in here at the moment to pop in thoughts and comments and so on as we go along because, we want to live by that process in here as well.
Of course, please do.
So, look, I think mindset's a really important thing, particularly right now. We've had, there's been an enormous amount of work had to go on in the last 6 months or so where people have just literally had to spin on a dime and just launch into digital worlds in many, variety of ways and with a variety of successes and so on in there. But I think it's time, we really need to take a breath now and just say, look, we've had to go through a really fast iterative process in terms of transitioning to digital in a lot of cases. But as you say, digital's been around for quite some time.
Not new.
But I think what we've got now is an opportunity to say, take a breath and consider what the future does look like in terms of what we need, what are the big problems. And we've got some massive issues that we've got to solve, not just prior to the whole COVID thing coming along, Industry 4.0, the shifts in digitisation of workforces and so on was at a massive rate in terms of the changes. And so we had a big problem to actually address there. But now with COVID on top of that, it's actually accentuated the need and the importance for really taking a breath and looking at how we deal with education more broadly. So to jump into the design phase of this, I'd really like us to think about, take a step back, and Sean mentioned before in the previous session, as to let's actually address and redefine the problem that we're trying to solve. Too often with from a design approach, from a learning perspective, we take something that we've been delivering face-to-face and we'll just do our best to replicate that in some sort of online environment. We don't consider the actual problem we're trying to solve in the first place and readdress that. And the opportunities, what we see, and something that we've been waving the flag for from a digital point of view for some time now. And again, I'm talking about the professional education sort of space, so not for credit, postgraduate sort of space and professional education, is that we've got an extraordinary opportunity to really focus in on capabilities and skills and so on, and look at what the real value is that we're trying to drive out of education, and redefine how we're going to solve those problems, because in a digital space, we've got enormous opportunity to do that. And what we've seen, and the data shows us time and time and time again, is that we can develop and deliver a far better product from an educational perspective through a digital program than we ever could in a face-to-face environment. And I know that goes a bit counter to some people, but it's absolutely what we've seen. Yeah.
Well, it's a different product. And I think that's the key here. We really need to shift that mindset that we have to emulate exactly what we see, what we used to do face-to-face. We have to try and emulate it online. I think what we try and do at Oppida often is to say, well, what is the best way to actually to get this learning outcome across? Not what did we do before, so let's just try and make that happen online. It's like, what is the best way for this learning outcome to be achieved from the student? And that's the starting point that we have with our conversations we have with clients. We do obviously sometimes say to them, well, look, this is what you can do that's kind of like this when we used to do this face-to-face. But let's actually just go back to the drawing board and design for the exact medium that we're in. So, instead of trying to kind of retrofit something. I mean, is that something that you have a conversation with your clients about? Like, it's a redesign. You have to start again and think about it again.
Yeah, like obviously you can leverage what you know and understand from the previous version of what this program looked like, and draw from that. But I think there's such value in just taking a step back in that initial conversation to say, let's just redefine the learning outcomes again. Like, at a very practical level, we often have clients come to us and they'll say, so here's the learning outcomes. They've already put some thought into it, or whether it's an existing program, a new one. And often those learning outcomes, because they're in their mind, they go, okay, we're going to a digital space, so let's pull it back a little bit. Let's dumb it down almost a little bit. And no, we actually wanted to swap that around. Let's actually raise the island. Let's raise the bar, because we can drive, where they might come to us with a learning outcome. We want people to be able to, at the end of this course, we want people to understand X, Y, Z.
Exactly.
Let's get them doing and applying and using X, Y, Z rather than just understanding it. So that's the approach.
Yeah. And we have a great deal of flexibility on offer with online, and that's where it's just having that kind of. One of the things I say often is it's really hard for us to design something amazing if we can't see something amazing. And a lot of people haven't had fantastic experiences with online learning, and so therefore the bar in their mind is sort of lower. And that's why our catchphrase is raise the bar. And I guess today showing you this setup is sort of saying what's possible even from a seminar, Zoom, whatever you want to call this. Online workshop, whatever, that you can actually put the same sort of degree of quality behind something online that you can in the face-to-face. Because if we were all in Melbourne together right now, we'd all be in a beautiful conference room and standing up on stage with big lights and all that kind of hoo-ha. And we can actually do that now from our homes as well, which is why this setup is here today, to show you that. But going on to the next thing, the next question, Anthony, which we've kind of touched on, is this principles for designing online. So do you have some sort of quick tips, maybe the 3 key principles or 3 key things that you say to your clients around when you start? We kind of touched on it before about, going back to what the learning outcome is, but what are your other principles for designing online?
Sure, and I guess even from that, without getting into the detail of starting to work through a design phase process, but if we look at from a principles point of view, saying what's the opportunity in terms of who the group's going to be coming in for this? So who are the learners? And let's start with that perspective around what's their objective? What do they need to get out of this? What's the experience going to drive for them in terms of their career and so on going forward? But our ability, so one of the principles is let's make that a melting pot. Let's actually look and see how we bring in a really diverse group of learners. Now, this conference is a great example. Like you just mentioned, if we're in Melbourne, there'd be a conference room and so on going on. But gee, it would have been so much more restricted. We've heard some great speakers coming out of India this week. At least they could have got on a plane and that type of thing. But it was brilliant being able to hear them and talk. The people who can actually participate in this program, who are doing it from their living rooms and offices and so on around the planet at the moment, it offers us so much more opportunity. So first, like design principle, what's the melting pot we can bring together in terms of this group and this cohort, and what can they offer? What are the experiences from a cross-disciplinary perspective, cross-cultural perspective and so on that we can bring into that room to really have a great, very enriched discussion about this issue. So that's the first one. Second one is then when we've got these people, the engagement. How are we going to get them, yes, engaging with the content and understanding the content and so on. But then the next step is that how do we get them to engage with each other? How do we get them to draw out that secret source of their experience and knowledge into that environment, which will then elevate their thinking and their experience of that course content.
What's key there is you're saying engage to elevate, not engage for the sake of engage. So often we see, sorry, I just want to pick up on this because we see this a lot where there's engagement points, but they're not value driven. They're not going to give any added value to the learner. They're not engaging with other people. They're just, maybe doing some sort of active learning piece. And that there's a place for that too. But when we talk about engage, we talk about engaging to up the learning. So in a classroom situation, we would all be bouncing off one another if obviously the facilitator allows for that and isn't just lecture style. So I really think that's really important that you keep saying engage to up their experience on the learning side of things.
Absolutely. Look, and time, it's interesting. With digital, we get this ability to be able to use and manipulate time and space in terms of how we design and then deliver the courses. And people's time is so precious these days, and their focus. Trying to keep people focused on learning is a really tough challenge.
Absolutely.
And especially, people acknowledge in a digital environment, that is one of the challenges we've got to overcome, because you're competing with so many influences and so many things as we've all experienced in our day-to-day work at the moment. So the design and that engagement has to be really focused and very, very intentional to actually have an outcome. It's not just for the sake of it, as you say. It's really important that we use that time and we treat it preciously.
Absolutely.
When we engage.
We're getting a lot of questions come through, Anthony. I'm going to grab one of them. It was around assessment. And in the online space, does assessment need to change through online delivery? And I guess my answer to that at the broad level was, we do have to rethink assessment. What do you do around assessment? I know you're working more, not in the AQF kind of credentialed space, but how do you do assessment?
Yeah, and look, this is another fantastic point about. And look, people are going to get sick of me waving the digital flag here and how valuable it is. But our ability to assess, our ability to assess and look at, and again, approach this in a different way, because, if we compare, say, a professional education program where we're rolling someone into a room over on campus at MIT or Stanford for a week, or Harvard, and doing one of those sorts of programs there, or into your corporate training room for half a day or whatever it is. Our ability to understand, number one, how people are engaging. You get to see the eye line, but you don't really get to know what's going on in there in terms of are they getting this? Are they engaged? Are they switched on to what we're talking about and so on? In a digital environment, we get to see everything like that that's going on in terms of those.
If we design for it, though, Anthony, if we design for it, because we can also not have that opportunity. If we design a very flat experience with not many touch points or feedback loops, we won't see it, right? So we have to design for that. We have to design to see the eye roll. We have to see when somebody's disengaged by putting in enough checkpoints. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, I must admit, I apologise, because I was talking about what happens in the Cahoot environment, which is that happens automatically all the time.
Yeah. Your platform's designed for that. But I guess, with our clients, we're dealing with lots of different learning management systems, and it really has to be purposeful. You have to design in those checkpoints, those prerequisites, those markers, those feedback loops, those whatever you want to call it, to have that student feel like, you know, they're also progressing, so giving them kind of bite-sized, you know, ways to progress, but also for the facilitator to see in the analytics where they're dropping off. You know, we love, you know, things like Canvas Studio and Wistia and things like that, because we can look at the heat map and see where in the video they dropped off. You know, and where was it too long? Like, is it an 8-minute video and they dropped off around 4? Well, we do know that the rule should be around 4 to 5 minutes. So we've, you know, we broke our own rule. So whoops, we kind of got the evidence to show you that that's not, you know, we shouldn't have broke our own rule. So, you know, using the digital tools that we have to actually scan the room is super important in the design process. Yeah.
So that's certainly part of that evaluation process, where we can actually get a lot more intelligence around what's actually happening for the cohort and for the individual learners. And then you're looking at the assessment component. So, right, what do we want to put in place in terms of some sort of evaluation process? And again, it needs to be so aligned to what they're going to actually walk out the door with and use. Exactly. So, as a really practical example, one of the very first digital programs that we built was an engineering program. And it was in asset management planning, and it was a transition from a 5-day course into a digital program. And we looked at that and said, well, what would be a great outcome for these learners is for them to have actually built up an asset management plan using their own data over the period of time that we've got them, which ended up being 10 weeks in this program. And they're also evaluated on that at the end of the day. So they actually build this up, scaffold it up through the 10 weeks. Their end assignment is to actually deliver their asset management plan. It's reviewed, it's given personal feedback and so on. And that's their final assignment piece out the door. And then they actually walk out the virtual door and they can implement that in their organisation the very next day. So it becomes not just an evaluation piece, but it's an incredibly valuable asset or a tool that they walk out of the program with. Could not happen in the original face-to-face version of that.
No, you're right. You're right. And I guess we've been talking about authentic assessment for years, especially if anyone who's ever worked in K-12 space, where we use the word authentic assessment all the time. But that is a real true example of authentic assessment, because it is something that is also bite-sized. So that's one of the things in digital that we get an opportunity to do, is we get an opportunity to chunk our learning into smaller pieces so that people can consume when and how they need to, and they can start to feel that, okay, it's progression, and they can then engage in assessment tasks or tasks that align to the assessment. And that's maybe going back to that question that came from the audience, was around how do we design our assessments better or differently in online? And that's exactly a really good example. It's something that you can do the end of every module or whatever you call your structure, that they are actually going towards something that they can then take away with them. So that's a brilliant example. Thank you. So what is quality? Oh, sorry. There was
I'm just trying to keep up with the questions here too. There's some great.
Yeah.
Sorry, you go.
All right. I was just going to go with. So someone has asked a really great question. Actually, I haven't had this one before. It was around how do you keep. I think it's something to do. I think it's gone off the screen now, so I'm going to have to ad lib on this. It was around how do you engage learners to keep them encouraged to stay engaged, so that they can actually create meaningful relationships, not just surface level relationships, because it does take time to build trust within a group, and that psychological safety inside of an online experience, if it is a high touch delivery model, is super important, and it doesn't happen overnight. So how do we keep those learners in there feeling like they can kind of keep engaging, and then that becomes a meaningful relationship that they've built, just like you would if you were, going through a degree with somebody in face-to-face model.
Yeah, look, I think we've got to be mindful that not everyone actually does want to do that.
Great. Yeah.
And not everyone. We've got learners who come in with all sorts of different circumstances, and again, we'll look at their back behaviour and so on through a program. And let's say, for example, we might have a really short form course running that we estimate is going to take someone, let's say the estimate is take 10 hours to complete the course. Now we'll see from their activity levels and so on across the cohort that some people will actually be in there for 30 hours, and they're actually just diving in and they're having these detailed conversations. Yeah. They're building the relationship with their cohort and individuals in there, and they've totally immersed themselves. And that's obviously we love to see that as educators, but that's not the reality of everyone coming into our programs. We'll see the same course, and where we're recommending 10 hours, we'll see someone who's actually gone through and finished it in 5, and they've completed, and there's been not a lot of engagement between them and the rest of the cohort, and they're out of there. Yeah. We really have to cater to both. in these programs. So again, coming back to the design principles, we need to be designing these programs to cater for both of those learners and obviously everywhere in the middle. But I think just
it's that option, right? It gives that more power to the student, which is what we always want in the end anyway. We want people to be sort of motivating and kind of engaged at a level that they can give, and self-directed. So I think that's a brilliant way to look at it. You can't expect everybody to want to do the full package, like engage with everything. I'm really conscious of time, Anthony, and I really want to ask this question because I think it'll be fun to answer. This is something I've been sitting with for a while now, and the idea of dropping the word digital. Why do we have to say digital education and when it's 2020? What do you think about that?
Gosh, there was
dropping the word digital.
Yeah, I know. Look, I think at the moment there is a differentiation going on. I think we need to. I think that language will prevail for a little while. It was gosh, the name escapes me now, but I was listening to. We've got a brilliant female CEO here in Australia, an EdTech startup company, and I can't recall her name, but she was talking the other day, and we were talking about statistics around female CEOs in the EdTech space, and that it's sitting around about that sort of 20%, 25% mark. And her comment was brilliant. She said, "I really look forward to the day where this actually isn't a conversation."
Yeah, exactly.
We're not talking about ratios because it's irrelevant, because it's just natural that there is a more balanced approach. And I think it's similar with education. I think, I think the concepts of good education apply across the board. It doesn't matter whether you're walking into a physical room or you're walking into a digital space, so to speak. The concepts, we really should be looking at these, and I think this is talking about mindset and how we approach learning again as a baseline to reset our thinking. And Sean made a great point of this in the earlier session, and he talked about often, from a formal institute sort of perspective, we'll look at the restrictions and the regulations that we might have to play with, which is understandable, as might be sitting around our QF. But we really need to start with the problem in focus as to what's the outcome that we need to achieve for that learner in order for them to progress in a world which is just skyrocketing in terms of change.
Exactly.
We've got to look at our models from that perspective. So digital, face-to-face, whatever, it really should be about the learner outcome that we're trying to drive and raise the bar of that right across the board.
Yeah. And I guess the reason why I sort of pose that question is because I believe that if you are an educational institution right now and you're not thinking about digital, or you didn't even before COVID, then there's a bit of an issue with the mismatch between what our tools are and what the education system is doing. And the education system is always behind technology. And so I guess that's why I'm prompting the question now in 2020, should we just drop the digital now? But maybe we're not ready yet. But education should be something that's inclusive of, I guess, the way in which we live our lives. And I'm pretty sure there's not many people on this planet left without a phone. And so we are already digital beings. And so my point, I guess, is, let's just talk about education being better globally. And what does that look like? Whatever you've got, whatever opportunity you've got to do, face-to-face or digital. Yeah?
Yes. No, look, absolutely. Absolutely. It's about the end result that we're trying to achieve.
Yeah. And I think we've got 2 minutes to go. So I'm conscious if I ask you another question, we might take another 3 hours. But I guess I'd like to say thank you, because when I learned about Cahoot and what you guys were doing, I was just super excited by the focus on the human and on the student and on that collaborative nature. And I think that's where that's a huge mindset shift that we need to make, especially in higher education, that people come into a situation with a whole toolbox of their own knowledge. And we know this. I'm sure everybody on the call is going, yeah, I know. But it's so often when we get into that design process that we seem to forget, and we think that we have to tell them everything. And exactly, I believe that content isn't king anymore, curation is. And that's what we talk about a lot at Oppida. It's our job to kind of help you create a journey so that learner can kind of engage in the way that they need to for wherever they are on their continuum of learning around that outcome. And I guess that's why I really loved Cahoot from the second I learned about what you guys were doing, because you do put a lot of that onus on the students. So thank you very much for founding Cahoot Learning and for waving that flag around community-centered, learner-centered social learning. And Oppida will keep waving the flag for learning design and the importance of the design process in the digital education space. So thank you so much, Anthony.
No, My pleasure. And again, awesome job on the
On the set.
I'm blown away. Me and my table, you know, we can't compete with that. So no, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah,
Thanks everyone.
right.
I would love to have been able to get into more of those questions and so on.
I know. We could
By
talk
all
for
means, if anyone wants to hook up on LinkedIn and continue those conversations, those questions, you know, really happy to do that.
Yeah, same here. Please connect on LinkedIn.
Thank you so much, Bianca and Anthony. A very interesting and a must topic, I should say, for all our educators to follow, you know. So thank you again both. Greatly appreciate your expertise and time in being with us today. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Hope.
All right. I think we are ready for our next session. We've just heard about how we can make use of EdTech and online learning tools to effectively transition content to online teaching. Now let's look at how innovation spans across the international student experience. This is a topic I am most excited about, being a former international student myself, and I am so looking forward to what our panelists have to share towards a more meaningful study experience for all our international students. So with great pride, I welcome the moderator of this session, Mark Pettitt. Mark has more than 20 years experience at a senior level within the education sector. Mark founded Edified, a specialist higher education consultancy dedicated to assisting Australian, New Zealand, and UK providers and UK education providers and promoters to significantly improve their ability to build their brand and reputation, acquire and retain students, and deliver outstanding student graduate success. Great to see you here at the Summit, Mark. Thank you for moderating this session. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Hope, and thank you, EduGrowth, for inviting me to this. I'm super excited about this session. So this next session is all about innovation. And in particular, innovation throughout the international student experience. Those are two things that I'm particularly interested in. So the discussion topic that we're going to be putting today to the our two speakers, is the international education industry must recognise the student experience extends beyond campus life, looking toward full immersion with access to social, cultural, and employment opportunities. This upcoming discussion will explore how connection between international students to Australian education can be enhanced with innovative technologies. So there's a lot in that. I think it boils down to three things. One is all about extending or extension. It's about connection, and it's about innovation or innovative technologies. So next I'm going to invite our two speakers. Our first speaker is Elaine Starkey. Elaine is passionate about ensuring students have a truly rewarding international education experience. She is a strong believer that education is transformational, and when harnessed with real commitment, education can have a global impact. Elaine is the co-founder and CEO of Global Study Partners, which is an EdTech B2B aggregation platform for international student recruitment. She's also an inspiring leader and strategist, committed to delivering unparalleled access for students to study anywhere in the world at any time, creating global leaders through education. So welcome, Elaine.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you. I'd also like to introduce Owen Firth. Owen Firth is the Chief Employability Officer for ReadyGrad. I like that phrase, that a CEO is the Chief Employability Officer. So welcome. Owen is a passionate entrepreneur with a mission to revolutionise graduate employability through work readiness training and work experience programs. He's also an active speaker, as we're going to see today, in areas such as graduate employability, work experience, internships, work integrated learning, workplace readiness, job search, and career skills. So welcome to both of you. Super excited to have you here. And I love the fact that one of your businesses focuses primarily at the start of the student journey, and one of your businesses focuses primarily towards the end, although I imagine we're going to hear in today's session, there's a fair bit of integration between those two areas, and there's a lot that happens in between. Elaine, I'm going to put the first question to you, just because chronologically, students generally see your business before they see Owen's. So Elaine, in your business, which is mainly focused at the start of the student's journey, what are you doing or working on to extend the student experience?
Oh, Mark, look, very good question, Mark. Look, the student experience, look, it's changing at pace at the moment. I mean, students they're looking at the core benefits of studying overseas, and they're not just looking for a degree, they're looking for the outcome that degree can provide, and they're motivated by factors beyond the degree. And it's very relevant to have Owen here as well, because they're really motivated by their employment opportunities, their status, their lifestyle, and you really have to look at the key motivators and drivers for students. But certainly employment prospects and internships, post-study work rights play an important role. But at the start of the journey, they're looking at, what country, and Australia market international education very well, I must say, and so do the state study groups. But they do look at countries and cities. And so their perception is very important on how they see a study destination and how they see internship opportunities, employment opportunities. But really, to enable students to get the best experience, they need to be matched with the very best courses, and that's at the very start of the journey. Because we all know putting a smart kid in the wrong school really is a pathway to failure. So we need to make sure that the student is matched really spot on with the right course for their needs. And the reality of, most students are still using their local education agents. Our technology platform empowers those agents with unparalleled access to course stock and the technology to be able to deliver the right information around the courses to study overseas. But look, it's a lot more than that. Students they're able to access through, online choice. So we need to give them choice. And whether it's choice in courses, it's choice in internships, employability outcomes, insurances, homestay accommodation. So the world is changing because students are empowered with access to the information, and they deserve the right to be able to access that. So one of our partners offers a virtual internship. Students sitting in India can actually do an internship in an Australian company. I think that's amazing. That is just fantastic, especially in a COVID environment at the moment, that they can get that work experience. So look, and we can't really underestimate the importance of the student experience. And it's if a student has a really good experience in Australia, it's a world of study influencers, student influencers, and viral marketing. A student has one friend, and it goes viral. So it's really, really important that we deliver what we promised to deliver to the market.
Brilliant. Thanks, Elaine. I'm just going to come back just a little piece of that. If I heard correctly, did you say that you are offering virtual internships right at the start of the student journey? So kind of
it's offered out through one of our partners at the start of the student journey, that a student can actually get an internship in an Australian company, a virtual internship, which is very new and innovative. And that's one solution, but it's quite an exciting. It's new. It hasn't been proven that much yet, but it shows a new innovative creativity during an environment where that's really invaluable to a student.
Yeah, great. I mean, it doesn't surprise me, actually. We're probably going to see a lot more of this, where even doing part of a course is going to become part of the recruitment process, or even leaping into getting experience becomes, prior to an education experience. Owen, I'll put to you, in your business, which is primarily focused, or it might be blurring now, towards the end of a student's journey, or the end of part of a student's journey, what are you currently doing or working on to extend the student's experience?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And I love how much of the conversation about recruitment is about employability and employment outcomes. I think that's evolved massively in the last sort of 5 years, recognizing how important it is for student choice. So we play in that employability space, and international students have been a huge part of what we've been doing for the last 15 years. We started at the very tail end, sort of to your point, Mark. We started at the very tail end in the sort of post-study world. So when students are onshore, what do they do after they've completed their studies, and how could we support them into meaningful either work experience or work, depending on whether they were staying here. Around your question about the student journey, we've very much started to back end that more and more towards day one of study. So working with some of our university partners, for example, we've really worked hard to say, okay, this needs to be an employability journey that that runs in parallel to technical training, if you like, rather than being what is pretty predominant right now, which is still very much a sort of a piecemeal approach in many institutions, where there's a piece of work experience here, or there's a project here, or there's a seminar here, or online learning here, as opposed to a really deep and integrated journey that combines both employability, work readiness training, and experiences. And that's what we've created over sort of 2 and 3 year programs working with some partners. So I think that's really extended the journey, and the power of that is manyfold. It's a fantastic selling point and differentiator for the institution, but we get to tell the students the important truth about what the end looks like from day one. So they can start to make different choices and do different things and get experience, and they appreciate why that's meaningful at the front end. The other thing I would add in terms of extending the student journey is that we've started to play in is returning students. I think that's a very much underserviced market, yet a very large proportion of our international students do return home to work. And so, we created a product called Global Ready China, which was an online learning piece to bring, say, Chinese students up to speed about what's happening employment-wise back in their local economy, what to be mindful of. Because when they left, they actually didn't really have a clue. They weren't necessarily connected with the market, just like most graduates aren't. And sort of tied to that is the notion, which we haven't executed yet, around internships. So, our returnships, so internship back in the home country combined with some training, is that a great segue to, a great service, if you like, to help students segue back into their home countries? I think that there hasn't been a lot of interest from our partners yet on that last stage of the journey, but I think that would be a huge differentiator.
Brilliant. Thanks, Owen. I'm just going to put slightly the same question, tailing questions I put to Elaine. So in your business, I see you're extending into the education piece and integrating what you do with the university or who your partner is. Are you seeing any extension back into the recruitment funnel, either by your partners or through your business?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's as much as we all know it's absolutely the right thing to do, it's actually, I think, some of the decisions to engage and invest more is driven by marketing, to be blunt about it, and because it is hard to differentiate offshore, and these are things that really resonate. So if you say, well, we've got a career office, we've got some careers programs, we run these webinars, etc. That's okay, but everyone's got that. Yeah. What do you have in your brochure? What do you have in your material that says we have a deep and integrated program that's available to everyone, that combines everything you need to know from day one? Very different sales propositions. So, and we're seeing university partners of ours bundling internships and work experience opportunities as part of their offering, even if it's not necessarily embedded into the degree as a full credit, but they are basically funding the extracurricular activities.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. So we're going to move on to innovation now. So Elaine, coming back to you and thinking about innovation or innovative technologies, could be either. What innovations are you seeing with regards to connecting international students to Australia?
Look, there's amazing innovation, actually. And look, the student experience is changing rapidly and being enhanced by digital innovation. Like, I'll just give you an example. Last week alone, I looked at my diary the same week last year. It was really boring, but I attended a virtual recruitment event in Brazil. I did 2 virtual campus tours here in Melbourne, actually, and Swinburne had a Swintopia pixelated campus tour. You're seeing counselling of students online. There's Instagram live interviews. We had some faculty and professors talking to students on live Instagram through one of our partners in India with 1,000 students present, and they're really they're actually quite low-cost delivery models as well. But we actually have to innovate and deliver the student in the environment they actually listen to and they expect, actually. So I think technology is enabling and empowering connectivity of students even before they leave their home, really. So we're seeing some fantastic innovation, and prospective international students are becoming more critical and analytical when they're choosing their institutions. So it's really important that the institutions are engaging them at this level.
Yeah, great. Owen, I'm going to have a very similar question.
Yeah, I was going to jump in there. Right. We're seeing a bit of a change in the shift in recruitment as well, a bit. And I think the master agents, very high service agencies, are really they're doing very well, and they have it's very much a blended approach in international student recruitment. It's just not technology. You have to understand the cultural differences. You have to understand the needs of the student, and you have to have the access. So I think there's going to be technology platforms for aggregators, and there's going to be the large master agents, but the small to medium sized agencies will actually have to get on board an aggregator, or so there's a lot of changing in the world of student recruitment at the moment.
Yep, thanks for that. Owen, in your world, which is all about employability, are you seeing any innovations with regards to the employability of international students or innovative technologies?
Yeah, there's some. I'm probably a bit less buoyant on that. I think there's some. There's certainly, I'd call it probably progress rather than innovation. I think the biggest innovation of late, sort of forcibly driven, is this notion of remote internships. I think variously referred to as virtual internships, but I would distinguish that personally. I think a remote internship is where your intern is behaving like an employee is today, which is working on, or doing their internship from home using all the same technologies that a worker, that an employer is using in terms of collaboration and communication and so forth, access to online systems. So we and everybody else has rapidly flipped to those remote internships and put in place the things that we need to put in place to make sure it's safe and make sure it's legitimate in terms of learning outcomes, et cetera, et cetera. So what's interesting about that is I think it's probably here to stay in terms of an option. So we deliver hundreds, thousands of in-company internships, and that will continue. That's a kind of a premium, full immersion experience. I think remote internships allow a bit more scalability. They allow access for, say, regional students who can't get to a capital city, and they open up things like what Elaine was talking about, which is the opportunity for an international student offshore to be able to come and do an internship with an Australian company. It's a live company, it's a real thing, but they just don't have to physically be here. And that's probably more significant given a lot of the conversation we've had over the last couple of days around this notion of offshore transnational education and are students actually going to come here. So the concept of remote, and the nice thing about remote is certainly our university partners have accepted that it's good, it's real, and it's legitimate. Students have now started to really accept that as well, and that there's probably only kind of 10 to 20% missing in terms of what they would otherwise get if they were sitting inside the workplace. So I think that's significant. Other innovations, I think that, there's some good tech innovation. I think, Practera have been mentioned a lot through this conference. So I think they're doing some really good things in terms of their platform to try and provide scalability and manageability around, particularly around projects and internships. There's some initiatives around, the Study Victoria, Study New South Wales and so forth that are designed to really help and support international students. I think that we're doing more. Is it massively innovative? I don't know. There's some interesting things more broadly in the employability space, like the Inside Sherpa kind of model where, again, they kind of coin it virtual internship. I would more coin it it's like a career sampler. It's like a test run of what it feels like to to be a lawyer or be an accountant. And interestingly, that product is sort of back-ended to employers as a recruitment tool. So possibly more recruitment tool than a learning tool, but nonetheless delivering some value. So there's a number, but I wouldn't say it's a huge amount of innovation. I think there is a significant opportunity, but we'll talk about that in a second.
Yeah, great, thanks. I totally take your point about progress versus innovation. I think some things just cannot be innovated, and maybe the way a human being learns things can never be innovated, just like in a few thousand years, nobody's come up with anything better than a bowl to put soup in, as far as it goes. So, Elaine, we're just going to change tack slightly. Now focusing on the Australian and possibly the Victorian EdTech sector, what opportunities can you see for this sector, particularly in student recruitment? And is there anything particularly or uniquely Australian that we can share with the world?
Yeah, look, in student recruitment, I suppose we have seen a lot of new opportunities there, but not as many as I would have thought. I mean, from our own perspective, I suppose Global Study Partners is very unique. We're the only unique B2B platform empowering the channel. And we have, I suppose, it's for this audience here, I think there's a lot of kind of startup and early stage companies, and we have walked the walk of an Australian company really who, tapped into the Austrade resources, our state study groups. We've had enormous support from government actually. And we've built a technology platform that is pretty world-class, really, and competes. So there's only one competitor, really, that we see as a serious competitor globally, and it's a company called Applyboard into Canada. But it's not really about Australia. Technology companies here need to actually position themselves as global. Even though Australia is our core sending market, it needs to be a global platform to compete at scale. And this is really important. But look, we tapped into the KPMG Elevate 61 program. We did a stint in the Austrade landing pad. And then we got a grant from the New South Wales government to roll out a student biometric, identity application, and that will be going live shortly. So we're very excited about that, and we couldn't have done all of these things without the help of the state and federal governments, really. And so it's been a fantastic road, but very difficult to raise money here in Australia. But that's a bit about our company, and then Study Me, Mark, as you know, a brand new platform designed to help students, more a B2C platform, and it's reversing the model, allowing universities to search for students and students to be discovered by universities. So that's quite unique and innovative. I haven't come across that before, and another exciting model for the market. With regard to Victoria, I think Victoria do EdTech very well, but really it depends on what the students are motivated to do. It's really important to know what they want to do. Our students are really motivated by having that in-country presence. They want to come to Australia. Other students will want to do micro-credentials. It's a growing market. It's fantastic. And I think online, some students will start online and come to Australia. We have had a few examples, RMIT in Vietnam, for example. While borders aren't open, some students are starting in their campus in Vietnam, and then they will continue their education here in Australia. Swinburne have, launched, I think, fantastic scholarships for students to start their degree offshore. So, universities need to start embracing all of these as well. But look, Victoria is very strong in the EdTech side, particularly in online learning delivery. And we've heard fabulous stories this week, from, the Study Victoria, from the Victorian governments, and from Practera and all the other companies that have been Open Universities, Open Learning, all of those companies that have presented.
Great, thanks, Elaine. Owen, I'm going to put a very similar question to you. Is there anything uniquely Australian or uniquely Victorian that, with regards to employability, that we could share with the world? It may not exist, but is there something that we could share with the world and people would go, yeah, that's Australian, that's great?
That's it's a tough question. It's I feel like a politician. I want to answer the question I've got an answer to. Look, the one thing I can, specifically around that question, the one thing I can kind of zero in on is, we do have really strong post-study work rights here. Now, obviously, other countries are either matching or exceeding that, and it's something we've got to watch. But we do have very generous post-study work rights, and it's a key attraction factor. But what's super interesting is who cares about the student when they're in their 2 to 3 years post-study work rights? Our education journey stops at the gate of the university typically. So what we find, and we've worked for a long time at that end, we find a lot of international students just bouncing around in the market trying to figure out, what do I do next? Because I've had a very curated journey to this point, and now am I done? Should I be ready to get a job and work in Australia for 2 to 3 years? Well, the reality is, and I can tell you from being at the coalface, the reality is that a vast proportion of them are not ready to get a job, are not getting a job, and there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. So I think there's a really interesting, I don't know if it fully answers your question, but there's a really interesting opportunity to extend that student journey down that path and think about how do we service students beyond that, because I think they need a lot more support. The other extension, which I touched on before, I think, is there's more opportunity to do more for returning. So if we keep extending the journey, I think there's stuff that we could do. So I don't know. Again, to come back to your question, the value of an Australian education, if we know that the student has done a fantastic degree with great practical skills, with current tools and technology, and then they've had at least kind of 1 or 2 work experience opportunities throughout that time, and then they've been supported around being ready for the workplace, and then they've been supported in being ready to return to their home country. I think they're going to look pretty standout in the eyes of Chinese employers or Nepalese employers or whichever country they're going back to, and maybe that is kind of more about brand Australia. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks for that. Now, I'm conscious of time. I'm also conscious that we've got loads and loads of great questions still. So I'm going to attempt something. I'm going to try and wrap up most of these questions kind of into one question and put it to you. This is an attempt. So given that there are literally hundreds of millions of new students coming into the sort of available market space, we've heard that before. Students are going to be increasingly price conscious. We think the price of education is going to drop over time. We know that experiential education is really important. We know that the journey, the end-to-end journey is kind of, even in recruitment, students are thinking about employability, and that journey goes from recruitment into study, and study contains employability, and then there's the post-study experience, which might include returning. Is there a play? Is there a sort of technology we can imagine, or an innovative system that we could imagine, which could be Australian, which could cater for that entire journey? And I don't want a yes or no answer. I want you to speculate and see. Tell us what you think is possible.
Yeah, either of us. Yeah, I think there is an opportunity. I mean, look, I suppose we've built a business too, and we're building onto it every day to actually expand that experience into internships, into employability, so that basically, and it's not that we want to do it ourselves. It's we want to get the best in market to integrate through APIs and have that, job matching, AI to personality matching to where they're going to succeed, internship matching for students as well. We won't be producing, like our core focus is going to be providing the best courses for the students, but actually providing all of those services integrated through a platform to have an end-to-end solution for the student for life, really, because really if a student comes here and they end up living here or going back to their own country, they want access to all of that. They want their 20 hours a week, a job in Australia, and those student jobs should be readily available, student jobs, part-time, full-time career outcomes. So I think there is an enormous opportunity, and particularly I think the soft skills point is very important to Owen's point, that we should be helping students develop their soft skills to prepare them for employability as well.
Great. Thanks, Elaine. Owen, over to you. Is there something that Australia could do to cover all bases, the entire student journey?
Yes, I think whether that's one platform or one solution, I don't know. But look, I think we're doing a lot more than certainly. I mean, we started in this game like nearly 15 years ago, and there was a desert of acknowledgement around the importance of going beyond a degree. So I think the natural evolution is more, and that's driven by the consumer, driven by the student and their needs, and us listening to them, and IDP surveys and the like have been talking about that for years. So I think there is more and more we can do. I think one of the biggest challenges with the universities, I think, around this space, I mean, there's many, but a lot of funding comes in from university students, and my understanding is a lot of that's then diverted to other things that aren't about the international students. And so I'm not sure I see a commensurate amount of funding going to support the international student journey. And I'm no expert on the university funding piece, so I may have opened a bad can of worms there. But I would really like to see that, because with the right amount of funding, there is a hell of a lot more that we can do. And I think, Bo at Practera, I'm sure, would agree with that. Funding has been a key constraint around initiatives and people being able to do stuff.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, Owen, and probably possibly controversial. I mean, there is a line of argument which says international student money is largely channeled to research, which improves your rankings, which largely channels is one of the main drivers for attracting international students. I wish we had more time, but we don't.
I'd love to answer that.
Owen, do you have any final comments you'd like to share with the?
My final comment will answer the question that just popped up, which was, are Australian employers still reluctant? Because, again, I think this is a really key part of making the international student journey what it should be. Look, I think they're coming around. We've dealt with, 6,000 employers in terms of being willing to take on international students. I think they're reluctant to hire them at the outset. I think a lot of processes, graduate recruitment processes, etc., either actively or passively block out international students. But once they have an experience with them as an intern, we found, somewhere between a third and 46% are being offered jobs where I know they otherwise wouldn't. So I think it's an education process, but I think it's also, getting to play with them and realizing the value that they bring, particularly in their values and characteristics.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I'm going to pass back to Hope, I think, to wrap it up. But thank you, Owen, and thank you, Elaine. Really, really stimulating session. And wish you all the best with the rest of the conference.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much. Great discussion there, Mark, Elaine, and Owen. It's good to hear some of the things happening in the industry with the use of innovative technologies. Absolutely agree that there will just be more virtual and remote internships from here towards like what we do at Practera, as you guys mentioned. But yes, still a lot of thinking around how we can closely support our international students, like as you raised, Owen. So thank you for giving us a very real picture of things, because these issues are absolutely real and felt. So thank you once again for your inputs and your time, Elaine, Owen, and Mark.
Thanks, everyone.
Very much. All right. With a great morning on day 3 of the summit, today's thought leadership program brought together such a great ensemble of thought leaders. Absolutely brilliant topics and discussions we had this morning. I would like to again thank all of our speakers and moderators for lending their time and expertise to all our delegates. If you missed anything from this morning's session, all of it will be made available online after the conference, so please keep an eye out on the website and on social media for updates. This is only the first part of the day, so please join us again at 3 p.m. this afternoon, starting off with Robert Gregory, Tim Trail, and Jennifer Greger on navigating capital raising. Following will be an investor panel with seasoned investors, Sergey Benjamin, Shane Tan, and Karen Baum, and moderated by Patrick Judges. Our investor panel will then become investor shorts as they judge our live pitch competition featuring Grand Check, Ready Future, Dizzy and Augmented Haptics. How exciting, so better stay tuned for that. Once again, my name is Hope Delina from Practera. Thank you for joining us for the morning session. We'll see you again at 3 p.m.